Good evening, everyone. It's Wednesday, March 27th. We're going to say the pledge, and then we are going to start our session. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I think we're ready to go. Is everyone there?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I just want to start from a place of gratitude to the community. Some of you know that I had some surgery recently, which is why I'm also by Zoom. It was some knee surgery. And I wanted to thank everybody for the notes, the emails, the calls. It's very, I've always said this is the best community to live in. And when you need people around you, neighbors and community members, they're always there for you. So I just wanted to thank everyone. I don't have any major announcements. A lot of the information is going through the mayor's message, but if one of the trustees, is there any anything that needs to be brought to the public's attention for this week? That looks like a no to me. So let's get started.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are starting with our IT security policy. This is something that we've been anticipating bringing to the board for a while now, and we want to make sure it's discussed. We have Thomas DeMeo, our
Karen, if I could, Karen, Thomas has not logged in yet.
He's not in the audience either?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So why don't we wow.
I can start.
Do you want to?
Yeah, let's just do it.
We'll just start. Stuart will kick this off and Thomas will join us shortly.
Thank you, folks. Thomas DeMeo, who's with O'Connor Davies, is our IT consultant. He should be joining us momentarily. Thomas has developed and put together an information security policy for the village. This is for both front end and back end. You folks have been provided with that policy, which details various aspects of how the IT system will work within the village, and particularly with regard to third parties who may well have access to village data and the village systems. One of the things we are now doing is that for any vendor who may have access to village data, they will have to complete what's called a vendor questionnaire, dealing with their own security systems. We have that with the most recent RFPs that have been served, and we will be doing it with current vendors for the village as of right now. But what this policy will do, it essentially, and this, just so it's clear, this is a policy for both the village and the town, because the town is under our auspices as relates to the internet and internet security. They are, in fact, an additional insured under the village's cyber policy. But basically, what we're dealing with this particular policy is various aspects. One of which is who can have access to the municipality's information. If someone does have access, what procedures have to be followed. And more importantly, as I said, with regard to third parties, we have something that's going to be called an IT management team, which will essentially be the manager, the assistant manager, and the IT consultant to basically look at what the systems are within the village, and particularly look at risks to the system that are within the village. As Karen has told you in the past, much has been done to upgrade what the village has now. So what this is just a policy which will basically advise primarily department heads, employees, volunteers as well as third parties about what their responsibilities are with regard to using village data, maintaining village data, where to store village information or municipality information, and the like. It is very comprehensive. What you have here is basically the policy itself. There are, with that, I don't know, about 150 pages of particular individual policies that relate to very specific aspects of the IT world, some of which are well beyond what I know. And I have to ask my wife for translation on many occasions. But the important things to note in terms of what you have before you are a couple of points to note. First, that the municipality would limit access to municipality information and information systems to those employees, contractors, and third parties who require access to perform their job duties or contractual obligations or engagement terms as applicable. An example would be, for example, the company A1 that we are using now. A1 will be required to sign a confidentiality agreement. They will also be required to respond to the vendor questionnaire because they are one of those companies that have access to village data. Let's compare that, for example, to Melrose Lumber. Melrose Lumber would not be a high risk. They don't have access to village data. We purchase from them, but other than them supplying us with invoices, they don't have access. So it's in terms of who has access and who does not have access. That goes into the issue of risk assessment, who basically has the where the risk is here. You have to identify the risk, you quantify the risk, and you, as Thomas has here, you prioritize the risk. And the important thing here with regard, as I was talking about third-party access, which is really the most important thing here, is that the village must maintain appropriate security of its information and its systems that are accessed, processed, managed, or otherwise handled by third parties, including service providers, and select and retain those third-party providers that are capable of maintaining appropriate safeguards to protect the municipalities, or in this case, the village and the town's information and their systems. So I have received from Dale and Liz Nakari the list of vendors for both the village and for the town. I've provided that list to Thomas DeMeo, and we are going to go through that list and in essence rank the risk. And those who are considered high or medium risk will be required to complete this particular questionnaire and will be required to sign confidentiality agreements with regard to the use of the property, with the use of the municipality's information. There are other parts to this policy that deal within the village itself. For example, that HR will do screening checks on all new employees who would have access to the village's information. If someone is terminated, obviously their access to that municipal information is basically lost and it is gone. As I mentioned, there are various operational policies and procedures which flow from this policy. And that's the long and short of it. I don't know, Maddie, has he checked in yet?
No, sir.
Okay, thanks. So I can answer some questions for you folks if you have with regard to this. This was, just so it's known, developed by our IT consultant. My job was to essentially read it to see how it fit within the village and town. The plan would be to ultimately have this board adopt the policy. It would then be sent to the town as basically the policy that would have to be followed. And that's why you have both on the front page, both the town and the village's seals with regard to this. But it is basically a village developed policy for the village and the town. And it would cover all village buildings. This will cover police, it will cover fire, it will cover anything at the op center, rec, all those locations will be covered by this policy. So
Stuart, Thomas
Okay,
just
to
joined you.
mention that Thomas is now
Thomas
with
is now
us.
here.
Thomas, we just, Stuart provided an overview of the work that we've been doing. So I think if you want to chime in now, that would be a good idea.
Sure. So, effectively what we're doing is facilitating the establishment of a cybersecurity program. And with this policy, that takes what we've been building and effectively makes it official, right? That is the essence of what that policy is, to now, I guess, make it official and continue to move forward.
So does the board have any questions?
Mayor, you are
Me-
muted.
Trustee Casada?
I think,
All right, sorry, I
Okay.
was just saying I can't see if anybody has any questions. I know I do. So Manny, are you starting us off?
sure, I can start with, I guess, from my perspective, the simple question, does this have any additional cost to our current budget in regards to the IT process?
The policy itself.
What entails of the policy, I'm hoping the policy not, but what entails
No.
of the policy and what it deviates from that is any additional items that we're gonna have to take in consideration to add all these different vendors that possible have additional, I don't want to say depending on the risk, sure. So what is there any additional security systems that we have to take into consideration for next time for budget wise?
I mean, as of right now, for the policy itself, no. I mean, as things have been maturing, there's been additional things added over the years, but not as a direct result of the policy, more as a direct result of maturing the cybersecurity program and dealing with the threats as they evolve.
So based on
But
your
not a-
experience, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but not directly related to that policy.
So in the past few years where we have established this sort of policy and the different security systems, more or less, the percentage of the budget, you may not have that number, but more or less, I guess it will be a Dell's question. How much more have we increased money-wise towards, budget-wise for this type of security that we've been
We can s-
established?
Yeah, we can certainly get those numbers. What was in the budget for 2024 should be sufficient to cover what we need now. I think it's important that the board recognize that the threats of cybersecurity change moment by moment, and governments are at fairly significant high-risk targets for a multitude of different things. That said, we are trying to get to the point where we are secure while being cost conscious. There probably is a very, very high ceiling on cybersecurity that probably would be cost prohibitive. So we're really triaging and making sure we're doing the most important things, the things that we know we need to do. As that progresses, we will be coming back to the board and discussing things if we feel that it is essential that we implement it. But to be honest, it's hard to say what the cost could be going forward. And we're just working to keep things as manageable as we can, given the resources that we have.
So just a little bit more like what Tom and Stuart mentioned, this is more just to codify right now what the process that we have done already.
So it's what the policy is really to ensure that everything we've done
Yeah.
is making sure that the employees themselves, our vendors, everyone is very well versed in the risks. So we have a lot of trainings online for, phishing scams, things like that. And one thing that we've become more cognizant of is that, when we're working with vendors who have access to our information, we not only have to worry about our systems and our security, but theirs as well. And that's something we've been focusing on more recently, which is why Stuart has been collecting information on our vendors, and Thomas has been advising us on things that we need to make sure that our vendors have, so that we're not, particularly when we're dealing with vendors that are dealing with finance, payroll. There were some issues with the tax department in the town, so making sure that not only we are secure, but that our vendors are secure as well.
Also, I can just say that one of the examples that we're in far better shape is that we actually saw a slight decrease in the premium for our cyber insurance. Those applications for cyber insurance, even renewals, are lengthy. They have a lot of different questions about the different systems that you have. And we actually saw a slight drop in the premium with the coverage staying the same. And cyber numbers in terms of insurance have gone through the roof in many places. So that's, to the benefit of what Thomas has been doing and the other folks and other staff to basically put the village in a far better position than it would have been even 12 months ago.
Right,
Okay.
and there is an effort to pay attention to what grants are becoming available, and also what the county itself is making available to the municipalities.
Okay, that I was actually going to ask that because there was another email when we were talking about not this topic, but the email showing changing to Gov itself that was
Yeah.
part of what, So I was going to ask if there's any grants available for this type of systems implementation and what can we get. So, but thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Thomas. Hello.
Hi,
Welcome.
how are you? Thank you.
Well, thank you. So I have 3 questions for you
Sure.
and the group, whoever else is able to answer. First, if you can speak a little bit about the process for monitoring compliance with this policy. What does that look like?
Sure. So where we stand right now, right, we had to get it to a place where, we were effectively doing those things within the policy. So now as we move forward, every year there is a risk assessment and really a validation that the controls are functioning the way we would expect it to function. And ongoing. There are weekly and consistent meetings with the IT group and especially the IT managed service provider to, speak with them, understand what threats are coming in, and then provide consulting and advisory as how to move forward.
Thank you. The second is the IT management group is that the body that would be evaluating how you would update these policies? The manager described how threats are dynamic and ongoing. So what is the process for updating these policies over time?
Right. So the intention is obviously once they're formally adopted, that these would be reviewed at a minimum on a yearly basis. Or, if there was something that materially changed during the year that would warrant an update out of band, so to speak, then that would be communicated with that group for them to make a decision on how to move forward. And an example of that would be, for example, when we first published the user information security policy, there did have to be make an amendment to the mobile device section.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. Can you talk about the specific technical and physical security measures in place to protect the Austening's information systems?
I might want that in an executive session because we're talking security there, and I don't think that's necessarily something to be discussed at a public meeting.
Sure. Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Great. Dana, any questions?
No.
Bob?
Oh.
Okay, so, hi, Tom. Thank you for joining us. A couple of questions from me. Some of my questions have been answered, so thank you. I have not read the lengthy information that was sent to me. I apologize, but I will. What I'd like to do is just leverage off of what Trustee Casada said, which is it would be easier for me to understand the policy if somebody can redline what's different than what's already being done. In other words, I'm sure in the many pages, there is areas of improvement over what you've been doing. So if I get a document that's redlined, I'll be able to say, okay, this is, as Tom had said, this is what you guys have already been doing. You want it codified. This is a couple of additives or 3 or 4 additives that while you're doing this, you're improving on it so that I can see what things we're doing differently than we have been doing, whether regardless of the fact that we're codifying what you've already been doing, which is how you started this conversation. Is that
Sure.
possible?
So just so I understand, so from before this existed to what is the difference between before this policy ever existed to what it is now?
Okay, the policy, I'm not even sure we've actually passed a policy in the past, have we?
No,
So,
no, this is
Mayor,
the
the
first.
So there's
policy
nothing
is,
before.
yeah, the mayor, the policy is really relatively unchanged. So this is just an opportunity. We had planned to come to the board earlier and just because we have so many other things on the schedule. So this is just reviewing what we've done. So there haven't been any substantive changes in the policy itself, but we're just explaining to the board, to the public, what's been done because the work prior to having a policy, which, you know, until this, we had this policy, we had nothing. Prior to having is hugely significant. So it's really just an update to inform, but it's the policy that
We
we've
never
had.
passed a policy. You guys have been doing things de facto, if I understand this correctly. So what I would like to understand is, and I think Manny was trying to get to this, is what things are things that you've been doing anyway? Maybe it's 100% of this policy, because it's not just a policy, right? What a policy does and what I've learned is it opens a door. And once you open that door, infinite number of things come up and then it gets referred back, well, we passed a policy that allows us to do X, Y, and Z. So my actual interest is all the things that you've been doing and now you want to get it done, you know, through this process of the legislative body approving it. That's fine. I'd like to understand if and what specifically are the things that haven't actually been done de facto, that there might be some new ideas that you've added in there. My interest in passing policy is to understand what door we're opening and how big that door becomes. There are a lot of things that we pass and then we find out, and I'm 100% sure it'll happen with this. You know, in 2 months, there'll be something new, we'll have to add it. In 3 months, there'll be yet another thing that we'll have to add. It's not just about passing a policy, it's also what road does it lead us down? It's not just budgets, because I suspect that the budget for security and IT will be growing geometrically over the next few years. But part of it is because I'm not sure we invested correctly in the past. By correctly, I mean not money-wise, but in the right things, and we have sort of fixed that path, so I'm very grateful for that. Part of it is just the cost of IT work, and the third part is the cost of cybersecurity, which is IT on steroids, right? Because cybersecurity and IT are, like, in some areas are actually two different departments. So I'd like to get understanding if there's new things that we should know about that went on this year that you've added to this. And if there's nothing, that's fine. That's a very short request. I just want to get a sense when we talk about cybersecurity and whatever we're passing, that the board has a sense of exactly what we're signing up for when we pass this policy, and if it's the right size for us at this point.
Sure.
We're not
So
experts in it, so I appreciate that we're not experts in it.
no, of course, Mayor. So, one of the things that was mindful with this policy was to make sure that it is reflective of what you're doing. To your point, you don't want to have a policy that, is generic and it's not realistic for the village or town to accomplish. So that was baked into the process. And with the way it's written, it's effectively becoming, think of it as a baseline. So I don't predict, based on how it's written, that it's going to have to be changed materially over any period. It's kind of built, I would say, based on best practices, so that from a standard expectation, we know what has to go forward. And a prime example, just to set a simple, would be, for example, we have a standard in there that says, all right, well, passwords have to be X number of characters. Well, now that's the standard. So now whatever application or system comes in or device, that's the standard. So a lot of it becomes driven by configuration and then also process. For example, with the patching, a very important control. Well, now the standard, which is consistent with best practices, well, it has to be on a very monthly basis and monitoring it and make sure that things are being done the way they should be done. And this helps add that level of accountability. So even, for example, the managed service provider that provides those services, well, now it's a divine standard that dictates how the village should be protected.
Okay, so I see two things coming on, so I appreciate that, thanks. So a couple of things are going to come out. If we have a third-party vendor that doesn't meet some of the requirements, we are going to have to decide whether we end our relationship with them or not, right? That's a decision, right? So
So
that's going
part,
to, huh?
yes, so part of this program is vendor due diligence. You
Well,
know,
the third-party
to,
vendor is a big deal, right? That's
right,
not a minor
absolutely,
deal here. That's a
absolutely.
real big deal. We do business with a lot of vendors, so does the town, and they're not always the same. Another issue is that the fire department and the police, I'm not sure how integrated they've been, although you've done work with the police. That's how we learned about you guys, if I understand, if I remember correctly.
They're completely integrated.
Right. I think the firehouses, I'm not sure where in all the cybersecurity, all these websites that are out there come into play. So maybe if I read the policy, then I could ask you questions separately, because in fairness, I haven't read all of this, so my answers might be in there, so I'm not gonna take time to do it now. I will say, though, having sat on numerous compliance committees, the committee of a manager, her subordinate, as the committee, I'm not sure is big enough of a committee to really look at compliance issues and the vendor, because you're actually not, you're an outsourced vendor yourself. It seems to me that you guys might want to rethink to put a compliance committee together that is a little wider. A, because more people should understand things, and B, because more people, when they see things happening, should know to come to you. So you might want to look at the various departments in the village, like the police department, the court system, the town. And even though we have the IMA, it just seems to me that the representation on a legitimate compliance committee might need some rethinking. Now, I'm not asking you to give me names, and I think the elected officials should also have a representation. That's my thought. I'm not saying exactly who you should have, but I've been on compliance committees as a person who does marketing. I usually sit there and do absolutely nothing because, but I'm on the committee, so when I hire vendors, I know what I have to tell the vendors they need before I even send them a contract. I tell them right up front, if you don't have X, Y, and Z, I can't even talk to you. And it's eliminated a number of places that I've had to do business with. So I sit on on a compliance committee. It educates me a lot about cybersecurity. So that would be my recommendation coming out of this. Because I think this is going to be a very important committee.
Sure, Mayor.
Not
So it sounds almost
committee.
like an IT, almost like an IT steering committee, so to speak.
I was thinking more of a compliance committee, but you guys can name it whatever you want. I just think it needs to be a little bit wider net. I've learned that, the firehouses have lots of different websites. There's social media. Committees aren't just designed to be one way. They're two-way forms of communication, and you don't want to make them too big because then nothing gets done. Right? And it's always the same person that never shows up, except their name's on the committee. So you want to be thoughtful, but you want to be inclusive so that it's not just an IT and then the manager. It's got to include more of the departments and more of the departments that are marginal, not always in the center of things.
Yeah, I think that's a great
That's just my
recommendation.
thought. That doesn't mean you have to, it's not an order, it's a thought.
No, it's a great recommendation. And then again, I think from where the village was initially to where it is now, I think it's in a position from a maturity standpoint to start to expand the net, to get more visibility, because the low hanging fruit that existed has been resolved. Where, I think you're in a stable position, maturing, but you're at a stable position.
That's great. So thank you. Is there anybody else, any other comments from manager, assistant, steward? Anybody? Not seeing any hands. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. We have one more related item. So a while back, we had talked to the board about transitioning to a .gov email domain. And at the time, we had sort of held off, just really more so because we we'd gone through some changes with email, and we just wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be, any disturbances in our communications. However, the good news is that because we were proactive, we are in a very good place right now to move quickly to now do what is being mandated by the county. So by the end of July, we have to do this anyway. And right now we've already requested the domain. I believe we have it all secured. So it's just a matter of timing it and getting it done before the end of July, and we will be in total compliance with.
I thought there was also a cost
County.
issue in doing all of that. Is there a cost related to this?
There is no cost related to it.
Okay.
So, the work that would be done based on the contract that we already have, unless I'm missing something, Thomas.
No, there would be no costs in that sense.
Is there another sense where there would be cost?
Well, I mean, if you're changing, you're changing email addresses and things like that, it's a matter of, do you want to update business cards and those types of things? Which,
Right, you have to
the
update.
old, yeah, and I'll be honest with you, Mayor, the old domain is not gonna not work. So it could be one of those things that you just use what you got, and then when new things come in, well, it's the new address.
How long will that last? How long will it be forwarded from one to the next? How long will the pointer be there?
It could be indefinite, as long as you own that old domain, which I wouldn't give up either way. That
Well,
would
you'd
be my
never give that up.
recommendation. Right, so as long as you own it, you can point to it forever.
Okay. Anybody it's hard for me to see through Zoom, so you guys will have to sort of chime in. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
No,
Okay.
no.
Alrighty. I'm not seeing anybody. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. And we will, we'll be talking to Christina and the folks at A1 to figure out when a good time would be to start evolving to the new domain. And it's a very good chance we may be the first municipality to be in compliance. So.
Well, I doubt that if anybody isn't in compliance, the county has no authority to punish anybody. I'm not sure this
Well,
is
I think
a
it's
race to anything, but it'd be nice to do it.
I want to give everyone props for understanding the importance of this and for making sure that we had the guidance we had to
No,
be
it's
a little
great.
bit ahead of the curve. So, all right, thank you very much, Thomas.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Okay. We have Valerie Menastra here tonight from Nelson Pope Voorhees, and she will, the first item, she's got two items, or actually three items that she'll be talking about tonight. The first item is short-term rentals, a continuation of our conversation on Airbnbs. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Valerie.
Good evening. So a few months ago, I believe it was a few months ago, we talked about developing potentially a short-term rental regulations within the village of Ossining. And I said I'd come back to you with a little bit more or less like a matrix to guide the discussion, because there's a number of different decisions that the village needs to make in order to really develop short-term rental regulations. And so tonight I'm going to kind of walk everybody through some of the decisions. None of them have to be set in stone, because what I can do is, because as I mentioned before, there's really no like standard in short-term rentals. Is really what works best for each community. So there are some communities that go one way versus another. And so, if for some reason there's a particular area, then when we walk through like the matrix that you say, well, I'd like to see what it would look like if we went this way or that way, then I can do that and bring it back to the board as like a draft. But this would help give me guidance in drafting a particular draft law for the board to look at, as well as I think it would be a helpful discussion for the board to have in terms of making some decisions. So with that, I can start running through the matrix. Any other questions? All right, so
Actually, I do.
sure.
So based on this and the matrix that you have, first question says allow, yes or no.
Yes, well, I'm assuming that.
So
we're moving forward with that.
okay, so if for argument's sake, the board says no,
Right.
then the rest of the matrix is
Yes.
no ball.
Right.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
So I assume we're moving forward with potentially allowing short-term rental within the village, so like. Copy that. Yes, yes, okay.
I don't know.
I mean. Okay, so. Yes.
I think that from the last conversation that you had in regards to this, I'm actually not in favor of doing something like this. So for me,
Right.
it will be a no,
Okay.
but obviously
then
the
we-
rest of the
let's have
board
the
will have to
discussion.
be, yes, I
Okay.
think we'll be fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for me, it's, and I don't know if Rika, yeah, for me, it would be pointless to continue doing this because we ask her, if my recollection, I will have to go back to the meeting, but my recollection from when she first was asked to introduce this conversation, I think we had maybe 3-2, I want to say. And then we said, well, let's hear back. So now that we hear back, for me, it will be pointless if the board still 3 no to 2 yes, for her to come back and keep going, revisit this. That's just my take. I believe so. I
So
believe
the
so.
board had asked
Yeah.
about.
Oh, we did ask.
back.
Yeah, we did. We
So
did.
she's back.
Yeah, she's back.
This is
Yeah.
that
So
meeting.
we will,
Correct.
do is, why don't I do this? Why don't I go through very briefly, right? To just kind of talk about the decisions that a community would make, right, if you were to move forward. And then after the end of that,
Yes.
then we can decide if we want to move forward or have additional discussions on this matter. Okay, so first of all, clearly the first decision we have to make is if you want to move forward or not. No, but in all reality, so some communities have short-term rental as a separate chapter within their code, as opposed to mixed in with zoning regulations. Some actually do have it in their zoning and it's considered like an additional use. So that's something that ultimately the village would need to decide. Also, there's decisions that need to be made in terms of whether it's like a building permit or whether it does require an approval process, either at like a town board, or excuse me, village board or planning board level. And then another thing is deciding on which zoning districts, right? Do you allow it throughout the village or do you want it in very specific areas within the village to be allowed? Another thing is whether you want it to be considered like a principal use. So can that be the only thing on that particular property, or does it have to be an accessory to a principal use? So, so that's another decision. And also, can it be like, should it be considered like a separate commercial use, right? As opposed to just an accessory to like a residential use. Another decision that would need to be made is in terms of like what types of housing would be allowed. So would it be multifamily, single family, 2-family, or, any variation of residential housing? Also, would it be allowed in accessory buildings in a lot? So for example, would it be allowed in something like where you had like a conversion for like a building conversion to like accessory apartment, or something in terms of like a garage or something like that, somebody wanted to turn into a short-term rental. Also, some communities specifically prohibit like things like tents, campers, trailers, because those will sometimes become short-term rentals. So that's something else that you would want to consider putting into the regulations. Another thing is looking at whether you're going to want to require that it becomes owner occupied, right? So whether the short-term rental has to be owner occupied on site, or whether it's something that you can offer short-term rentals without having the owner occupying that particular principal use or the property itself. And then sometimes also some communities look at the length. So some will say, okay, not necessarily does somebody have to be on site, but if somebody owns like a home, that they can only rent out so many months out of the year. So it's not something that becomes like a commercialized thing where somebody buys a property and then just has it operating as a short-term rental. Other communities say, no, that's fine. You can have it 12 months out of the year if you like. Another thing to consider is limiting the number of short-term rentals, whether you want to limit that in terms of the numbers within the community, or also who can register for short-term rental? Like, is it allowed by an individual or corporation law, LLC, that type of thing? Also minimum lot sizes, that's something else that we would have potentially have a discussion about. Setbacks, so whether that would be, if you're gonna develop a new short-term rental, whether that can be within the, it has to be within the zoning, or if there has to be some additional setbacks or different additional buffers, you know, especially if in certain residential areas. Occupancy limits to the short-term rentals, right? How many bedrooms, how many people, that can also be regulated. Also limiting the number of days. So typically short-term rentals are less than 30 days, but you can also limit it to no more than 2 weeks or more than like a week, or it's really up to the board on how you'd like to regulate that. And then a couple other things is dealing with like parking, whether, you know, what kind of parking would be required on site, or if there would be parking required on site, emergency contact information. And then also just dealing with signage enforcement, and then some other requirements in terms of utilities and that type of thing. And then the last, like really another big piece of any sort of short-term rental law is dealing with whether inspections and re-inspections, and you know, where there's a time limit for like a renewal for like a registration for short-term rental. Can that short-term rental transfer if that property is sold? And then fees associated with that. So that is a very, very brief nutshell of like all the issues that would need to be thought about by the village in order to move forward. And the reason being is because many communities have different answers depending upon their situation or what they're most concerned.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. I'd like to get a board's opinion on no on short-term rentals. And the more I see the amount of work, this village, in my opinion, has neither the capability nor the capacity to take any of this on. We're barely able to manage the homes that have been turned into commercial businesses by renting out to people, people who say they're in primary homes and have turned them into basically businesses. We're not even at capacity and capability to manage that. When you look at the parking issues at our residential communities, Bob Fritchie and I had a very interesting conversation the other day about that. So I'm a no on short term. So I'm a no. Manny, you're a no?
That is correct.
Okay.
Also a no.
I mean, I like the list. This is a very thorough, this is like a list of every possible iteration, it looks like, of thousands of communities and what they all do differently, including, you know, the Hamptons where people rent for 2 or 3 months, and all over the country, I'm sure there are different stories for every community.
Right.
Even in New York State alone, there are different needs in different communities and different views about parking and housing and everything else. But in this village, I think we neither have the capacity or capability to manage any of this. So for me, it's a no. What do others think?
Yeah, yeah, Mayor, I believe we have 3 no's, but it's up to you, obviously, if when
Who's
it.
the third? I didn't hear it.
I am.
Bob?
Yeah, we're
Rita,
not.
And I'm sorry, Omar. Any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, so last time we had this conversation, this is basically how it went. Then it got to me and I said, I'm a yes. And here's all the great reasons why I'm a yes. And then I forget what Dana was. It wasn't a straight no. It was, I don't know, she can speak for herself, but
Maybe.
it was a maybe. There you go. So we had 3 no's, a yes, and a maybe. And so the
Okay.
mayor, well, how about Valerie, you come back with like a bunch of ways that like maybe we can find a middle ground. If he's a yes and they're straight no's, that like maybe there's a middle ground. You know, thank you for putting all this work together. It's unfortunate that like we just end.
It's
the
not, I mean,
conversation.
it wasn't a heavy lift because this is something that we've used in other communities, so I didn't want you to think.
Okay, great, great. I'm happy to hear it. I'm happy to hear it.
It's a nice starting point we find to have that discussion.
Yeah. I'll just say briefly for the record, my sense is that you'll have any number of kinds of people that we'll be hearing from in the coming weeks. These include folks that have purchased homes or domiciles for short-term rental use here in the village that said, well, I didn't even know that this was a thing, that you were going to get rid of this. I invested all this money into the village. Look at all the people that I've brought, and all the commerce that it's done, all the good that it's done, So we will hear from those kinds of folks. We hear from folks that have particular need to come visit the village, and their only other option for a short-term stay is staying at a hotel in another municipality. They can't circulate the Ossining dollar, has to leave. And similarly, when you leave, what are you going to go grab some breakfast? You're going to go do a thing. You're going to do that somewhere else, wherever it is that you're staying. You're not doing that here. And you'll also hear from people that I think will look at this and say, why couldn't we find a way? Because it's the reasons that have come up as why this is problematic, noise complaints, any kind of disruptions. You know, you offered, I think, here some very good solutions that are not administratively taxing, whether it's a registry or other things that can ameliorate some of those concerns so that you can still have them without the same kinds of issues, or at least a way to address the issues. In my eyes, what will happen is that this will just kind of drive it underground, so that I still think that people are going to do it. Now, instead of it being a regulatory thing where we can help do it in a way that is regulated, people are going to do it anyway. And then now what is what I'm looking for? Like enforcement. Thank you. It's an enforcement thing. And so now we're like, okay, so we're saying, you know, the village has too much on its plate when it comes to actually managing this. But now you're putting on the police. They don't have enough on their plate when it comes to enforcement. So now they're enforcing short-term rental, and you're going through that whole process. That is where we're going to land, and that's fine. But my point is that this problem isn't going away just because we say there's no short-term rentals. There's still a need, and I think people are still going to do it. But now we're dealing with it on the other side. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, I mean, I'm not going to go back and forth. I appreciate it is the same conversation we had last time. I think that we have the bigger problem of sanitation and cleanliness and parking in our residential area that is so maxed out that we need to deal with one thing before we deal with another, instead of loading the horse cart with yet one more thing. And now everybody's running to manage this. So I totally hear what you're saying. Many villages don't have it. New York, Manhattan doesn't allow it, and people do it, and then it's up to their landlords and their neighbors. It's usually the neighbors who complain when they know that something is illegal. So we'll see what kind of complaints we get, and we'll deal with them one-on-one. I'm sure that you're correct about it. Dana, do you have any comments on this? I don't know why I'm showing up on two screens, but whatever. Dana, do you have any comments or thoughts? Because
Yeah,
right
I
now,
mean, I
too.
think if you Google Airbnbs in Ossining or short-term rentals, you will find quite a few. So, I mean, it's happening.
Mhm.
So it will continue to happen, whether we have a policy or not. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's a nice option for people. I think, you know, people come to Ossining for lots of reasons. I don't think they should have to drive 10 to 20 miles for a hotel. You know, we have no other options here for them. So,
Okay, they don't drive 10 to 20 miles. Tarrytown is 7.5 miles from
okay,
here.
sorry, 7.5,
Just
or
to be
Peekskill,
clear,
which is
filled with
10.
hotels, half of which have gone out of business because they're not full. Because there's not even enough demand for them. So I know that that's something that was said last time. I want to be very clear that you don't have to drive 10 or 20 miles to stay somewhere.
Well, it's just too bad that people are gonna be taking their money outside of Ossining, when they could be keeping it here, but I think that there's probably a way to figure this out, but I'm not gonna, you know, try and convince anybody, so
Okay.
no point in that.
Excuse me, I'd just like to make an announcement for the public that's viewing in. This is a work session. During work sessions, we typically do not take comment. However, at our legislative sessions on the first and third Wednesday of every month, you are free to attend in person or via Zoom and comment on any item at that point.
Thank you.
Folks, just
Work
one
sessions are
point.
really literally what they sound like. They're sessions where the staff presents ideas, follow up legislation thoughts to the board. the public is welcome to watch it. It's not an interactive between the public, the board, and the staff. It's between staff and legislative body. And as the manager said, the legislative sessions is open for the public at certain points of the agenda to speak to us.
Board members, if I might, as Valerie noted in her memo, there's virtually no laws in the village at all on short-term rentals. If the sense of the board is not to have short-term rentals, you need to put that into the law. Because otherwise, we really don't have a way to stop someone from legally doing it. So if you do not want short-term rentals, you know, Valerie and I can work on putting something
Right.
into our code, which specifically says that any rental under a certain X number of days is not permitted. Currently, the code is worded in such a way that an argument can be made that you don't say anything about it. And so it would be permitted. So if you don't want it, then we would have to come back to you with a proposed law to revise basically the property maintenance code with regard to that.
Yeah, I think we understand that. And then there'll have to be a public hearing, and also just a reminder to all of us, based on what Omar had said, when we pass a law, we can make it effective when we think it makes sense, so that there can be some adjustment time for people. Okay,
The
next.
one thing you do have is bed and breakfast, so people could theoretically come in.
Right.
and Bed and breakfast certificate, so I mean, clearly that's not, what's happening, but ultimately that if somebody does want to do something like that, you do have the ability to have a bed and breakfast.
But there are regulations.
There are
And
regulations for that.
some regulations in regards to that, restrictions and where that could be located and everything else, which is totally different.
It is different,
Correct.
different, but I'm just noting that there is that ability or a little bit
Right.
of ability to have.
For
some
them,
sort of-
flexibility.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, so people can have bed and breakfast. I don't know what the town regulations are about this either, by the way. Did we look into that?
You mean the town of Austining?
Yes.
Yeah, so they are looking into, they're basically at the same stage as you are.
Okay,
So
well, they
nothing to
have
talk about.
their demographics and their topography is predominantly single homes, some condos. And I think most condos have their own rules about stuff like this. And co-ops, which absolutely have rules about this. They usually don't allow this kind of stuff. But I guess some condos do allow it. They have their own rules. We have to figure that out. The town may have more space and capacity to deal with this. I don't know. But that will be interesting to see where they land. Okay, what's next on the agenda?
Sorry, Mayor, so, and I guess, are we in agreements that we asking Valerie and Stuart to come back to us with a policy in regards to short rentals?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because if
okay.
we're saying
Alright.
no on short rentals, we have to, as Stuart just pointed out, that's what he said last time, we have to put into law. Otherwise, what are we saying? Saying no by us in a work session means nothing.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
I have no desire for that to happen, but go ahead. Yeah. To ban them outright.
If you don't ban them, then they exist.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what we're discussing here tonight.
I mean, right now we have a don't ask, don't tell policy from what I could tell, right? Or don't, so, we either decide to continue with how we're doing it or we decide to pass a law to ban them. And I'm just saying, I'm not behind that.
Okay.
If we disagree.
All right. Next, on I'd say Valerie's agenda at this point, we also are coming back to the board with a discussion on vacant storefronts and things we can do in that regard. And we also have Joe Augustinelli, our building inspector, here too. So Please, Valerie, Joe, continue.
So before we presented you a draft of, and it's actually, it's an amendment to, you have a vacant building registry currently. And in chapter 162 of your village code. And we are adding certain regulations associated with vacant storefronts as well. And it's requiring a vacant storefront registry. When I was last before the board, I think the board asked me to come back along with, working with both the building inspector as well as Stuart to come up with specific requirements in terms of a storefront, a vacant storefront registry. So it's not necessarily you have to have a whole building vacant, but a storefront individually can also be required to register. It's very similar in nature as the vacant building registry. There are a few, a little bit of additions, and I want to just kind of call out those. It's in section 162-58. There's a specific section on vacant storefront maintenance. And this will require that the storefront be kept in good repair, painted when required. It also requires the property owner to do repairs and maintenance, including touch-ups, interior paint jobs, repairs, sealings of any leaks, plumbing or electrical issues, replacement of any cracked or damaged windows or doors. And then it also specifically has a whole section on windows and window displays that they should be kept in good, clear, and unobstructed condition. And then it also does require that if the storefront is vacant in excess of 90 days, window displays shall be properly covered. But it does have certain things in terms of what the covering is, so that it can't be, we can't have cardboard or paper. It really needs to be something that includes Venetian or similar blind shades, curtains, or other coverings. It could be also the window coverings need to be kept clean and neat, and that coverings dirty, torn, or otherwise would be required to be replaced. So this now would allow for the village to be able to say, this storefront needs some investment in order to, if it's going to remain vacant, to actually have that kind of a little bit more of a curb appeal. It also allows for window art to potentially be put on some of the vacant storefronts, again, to help with some of that curb appeal. And then it specifically prohibits newspaper, plywood, or white window paint. And then it also requires a registry similar to your vacant building registry, as well as like basically a future use plan, so that, it kind of forces the property owner to start identifying what they plan to do with that vacant storefront, and a little bit about their next steps. And then it does require an escrow to be established, so that if the village does need to actually utilize some of that for the maintenance of that vacant storefront, that they can. So this is basically to try to allow for the have the building department be able to enforce a little bit more in terms of, the buildings that basically just remain vacant, and kind of hopefully force the property owner to invest in some of those vacant storefronts. Any questions?
Okay, anybody?
I do have a few, I guess, not really questions, more that. So I'm reading the policy, the revised policy. I just have a quick question for clarification for me. What is the difference between the blue text, the green text, and the red text?
Sorry, I think that's a lot. I think depends. I think it was just a few of us in there. So it's that what is being removed is stuff that's being removed.
It's very clear to me, that
Okay,
portion.
let's just-
Yeah.
It was a collaborative effort. Since all of it.
So who is the green? I should ask.
I think green is also when you move from one to the other. So
Got it.
So when you move from one section to another section.
All right. And so in regards to all this stuff right now, Stuart, you may probably know, or Joe, how many vacant building registers do we have, more or less?
At any given time, probably up to about 20.
Buildings, or
Right now would be 20 properties.
20 properties? Is that what we're talking about?
Commercial buildings or
Of residential?
residential
Okay.
ones.
Okay. I'm okay with this policy. I think will be helpful to a lot of, try to enforce a lot of the stuff. I see that you clean up a lot, remove police through public works, and different of the area for enforcement and, you know.
I have, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. So I'm okay with this.
I'm good with it. I'm questioning the difference between a building and a store. They seem to be like colloquially interused, and they're not the same thing. Because if you have a store, if you talk about a building and there's a couple of apartments or even a single apartment over the store, then the building is not vacant if the apartment has people in it. So is it only storefronts regardless of what's in the building?
No, so there's basically two registries within this one, right? So if you have a vacant building, there are specific requirements for vacant buildings to be registered. If you have a vacant storefront, but yeah, let's just say, for example, your storefront is vacant, but you do have the upper floors of their apartments and they're rented, then you would register under the vacant storefront registry.
Well, what do
And
you do with the deli that is not vacant? They use it as storage for some of their stuff. There's boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff. I don't think they would tell you that it's vacant. They're not using
right,
it for
so the
retail, which is the
definition
purpose
for
of it.
the definition for a vacant storefront is any portion of a building or structure designed or used for commercial purposes, which has been unoccupied or unused for a period of 60 days or longer. Additionally, a vacant storefront will include any portion of a building or structure or portion that's unoccupied as determined by the appropriate village, county, or state agencies. So basically it's for commercial purposes. So if it's being used for storage, it's still considered a vacant storefront. It
Are you
needs to
sure?
be
It
occupied.
doesn't sound like it based on what you just read. It sounds to me that if I had an internet company, am I using a retail space for storing boxes of shoes, then it's not a vacant store.
We
The
can,
fact that people don't
we
come in
can-
there and the doors are closed all the time doesn't make it vacant. I mean, I'm just trying to make sure, I'm thinking of very specific instances, not the
Yes.
theory.
So we can tighten that
Okay.
definition a little bit more.
And can you also tell me what and how one enforces, there are a couple of places that look like they're retail shops. They have hours on the front door and they're never open. And the windows are totally covered by curtains that you can't see through. I don't think they're used for retail stores. So is there a way to refine that as well?
Did you want to comment?
No, I understand what the mayor is saying, that, you know, other than monitoring the store to see if they're ever open to the public, I guess that would be the only way to really, you know, to send a notice out to the property owner to say, you know, it appears that the business hasn't been open to the public for whatever duration of time. And, you know, follow up on that. I mean, it would just be a matter of, you know, seeing whether or not the business opens.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
So-
just
some of
trying,
it
I'm
could be
thinking of
just-
real life instances in our village. I don't know what happens elsewhere. I think that there are communities, I mentioned this last time, that say the retail spaces have to be open a minimum of X number of hours, you know, to the public. Otherwise, they're not really a retail space. I think it's really hard to manage all this. But since we're going through the trouble of codifying things, I'm just asking the questions. An answer could be, geez, you know, I don't know how we can do that except stand there for a full day and find out that they say they're open 9 to 4, but they're not actually open. I mean, I understand the difficulty. I'm just wondering if there's a way to codify that.
So maybe in locations like that, the building department can actually do an inspection, sure. Because we do have commercial inspections that we have to consider that, and that could be a possibility for us to get access into those particular buildings that you may be, or storefronts that you may be referring, or anything in there. So maybe that's one of the locations that you guys can get access.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we can do that, and just, you know, if we have, if we're looking and we have suspicion, oh, the store has not been open and it's been 2 months, we can always request and say we'd like to do an inspection and verify that. Because we do have the option to do fire inspections on our commercial buildings. So we can ask specifically for that particular business or that particular space, and we say we want to do an inspection on it. If we realize that it's vacant, there's no one there, they've moved out all of their merchandise, that's how we'll know.
Okay. again, I know that we don't make laws for a focus group of one. So I don't
And
want
I
to
think
There
think
is-
we
about
did
one
make it, there's
instance,
a,
so
there's
I'm not asking for that. If it's
There is
something that can
some-
be done, we could do that separately. I'm just asking the questions.
There's also something in the regulations, and we can bring them into the definitions, so it's a little bit more clear. But it does say the enforcement officer may identify vacant buildings or storefronts through its routine inspection process, as well as through notification by residents, neighborhood associations, and other community groups that a building may be eligible for exclusion on the registry. So it does give, there is ways that, there is, and this is already, most of it is already part of your current code right now. So we just added the storefronts into that section. So there is some language already in there that allows for the building department just making that determination based on routine inspections. So
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? I know I jumped in, so I didn't give everybody a chance. Anybody else? No, okay, thank you. Next. So I think Manny started with, he's for it, and we sort of all followed through. Is anybody not for this? Okay, so I guess we should move forward.
Sorry about that. We also have Valerie and Joe with us again for one more topic, and this is discussing stormwater regulations with regard to paving, the paving permitting process. This is another item we've discussed, and we're revisiting it at the board's request. Thank you.
So this one just has, so this one, I believe was presented in the past to the board. And then we had discussion last time and the board said, you wanted to see what, a draft local law would look like in terms of incorporating a requirement for a building permit for driveways or the expansion or replacement of driveways or parking areas within the village, specifically to really try to capture some of the issues that we've been having with stormwater runoff. So again, this is a collaborative effort between, Joe Stewart and myself. And basically the definition of building permit, if you look at 162-28 building permits, it now would specifically have a building permit issued by the building inspector or his or her designee is required for the installation, expansion, and or replacement of driveways or parking areas in the village. The fee for such permit shall be set by the Board of Trustees and published in the annual fee schedule. And if the installation, expansion, and or replacement of an existing driveway or parking area is part of an approved site plan, a separate application for a building permit will not be required. And then specifically in there, we also require, because of the, yeah, I think that's where we're really proposing to have that additional language at this point. And I thought there was one of those sections. What? Oh, yes, we did exclude resealing. Yes. Anything else?
Valerie, do you want me to bring it up on the screen?
I could like.
Joe, can you just give me in layman's term, what the goal here is, what the end goal is?
Valerie, the last page with the unnumbered section deals with the stormwater.
Thank you. Then there's one other one. So we're also requiring, is the last page? Yes. So we're also requiring to add in as part of into your stormwater regulations, specifically that if somebody does expand the driveways and stuff that they have to take care of and add some parking areas, they have to take care of the stormwater runoff associated with that additional pervious surface. And that's it.
Maddie, I think you may want to enlarge that if possible. Otherwise, I'm not sure it's helpful.
I'm racking my brain to figure out how to do that. I apologize.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay, wait.
If we
got it.
can, but
There we go.
I'm no Jamie. Sorry, everybody.
All right,
Okay.
that's somewhat better. Thank you, thank you.
You want me to go more?
No, I can read it. I don't know about
Yeah,
others.
that's maybe too much now. Okay, that's
That looks
good.
That
That's
looks
good.
good.
Great.
So, Joe, how do you think you're going to enforce this?
Previously, we were doing this where we were requiring permits. So a lot of the homeowners and the contractors were coming in and applying for their permits in some cases where just the code enforcement driving around would see that it was being done and a permit was not taken out for it, so they'd be stopped to make sure that they'd come in and get a permit. And the biggest reason why this was we were asking for those permits was because there are zoning regulations on what you could pave, impervious surface coverage, setbacks to side yards in certain districts. And obviously, but due to stormwater and since we were not taking any of the permits because it wasn't in our law as a requirement for a permit, we've had increased, especially with the strong rainstorms that we have now. We have a lot increased complaints based on people telling us, they're paving their entire yard and doing.
Yeah.
So we can try to regulate that, but and when people put in the complaints about it, but in fairness, sometimes the property owners, they'll get a contractor and say, I need an extra space here to park my car, and then they innocently think that they're allowed to do so, and then we realize they're violating the number of the close proximity to property lines. They're over the impervious surface coverage, and now we have to tell them, yeah, you can legalize it, but now you got to go to the zoning board and get a zoning variance, or you have to cut out a portion of what you already paid for to be installed. So with the permit in place, it allows us to be able to guide them and let them know what the regulations are before the homeowner ends up doing this and spending a cost that was unnecessary or something, that more so they'll have to, go to the zoning board and have to pay for, the fee for a variance and send out all the notices to neighbors. So it was something we had in place that was working well, and it was regulating and it was beneficial for homeowners. So
And why was it then taken away?
because an individual was paving and we had stopped them and gave them a stop work order, and it was written up in court, and it was presented in front of the judge, and the judge had said that because it wasn't indicated in our law specifically that paving was required a permit, it was dismissed.
So because one case was dismissed, you felt that you needed
Well,
to.
we stopped asking for the permits, because if it was dismissed, any other cases where we would put stop work orders and issue violations, the same result would continue to occur in court. They would get dismissed based on.
And when did this happen?
Approximately 2 years ago, 2022.
2022. Okay, I guess we didn't appeal it, because that's, I think, anyway, it doesn't matter. We're here now. I guess it doesn't matter. So it's relatively recently, which also explains why it's become, I mean, I've driven down a number of streets and there seems to be a real explosion in this. And I think it's bothersome to neighbors who then get water on their property because somebody basically paved over so much of their yard. So, we live in a tightly knit community in so many ways. Anyway, okay, so I get where you guys are going with this. Comments from the board?
I guess, not comments, but I have questions. And I think it's going to be very similar questions that I had last time, Joe, that you brought this up in front of us. And obviously last time we talked about, what kind of paperwork our homeowner will require to do this, because now it depends. Sure, if I'm just replacing my driveway, same location, same square footage, nothing's changing, do I require a drawing from either an engineer or an architect? Do I need to have calculations to prove that, that was there before, or it was more or less, the last time we talked about is like an existing survey of photos that will actually be sufficient for that
Yeah,
process?
what we were doing was if there was a survey, we'd obviously make a copy of the survey and put notes on the copy stating that the proposal is to replace the parking on the driveway in the same location. And then we'd be able to use that when we go out to do the inspection once it's installed. If there wasn't a survey available, what we would do is we would take Google Images and take a picture of that so we can see what the current driveway looks like. And then when they repave it, we can say that, oh, it hasn't been expanded. It's a replacement in kind, so therefore there's no increase in impervious surface coverage. There's no violation of any setbacks. But if we go there and if they asked, we'd like to expand the driveway, we'd give the option to say, well, you're way under the impervious surface coverage, so the additional asphalt that you're putting in is not going to go past the maximum permitted. It's not violating any setbacks, and therefore they would do basically a hand drawing on their site plan or on their survey showing the copy of the survey, showing this is where we want to do it. And then we obviously record that because now we know what it's been expanded to. And it would also prevent some people who were paving and creating parking spaces in the front yard. Now code says you can't park in the front yard.
Unless you get a variance.
Unless you get a variance, correct. We would guide them and say, if you want to do that, you're gonna need a variance, but at least the homeowner would be aware of what parameters and what they'd have to do and say, well, whether it's worth to go through that or not.
And the last time, sorry, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, and there is language like, so we are adding that into.
I saw that
into
part of the
this
storm,
policy,
yeah.
Right, to allow for that.
Stormwater, yeah.
No, not the stormwater, but also that the building department, like the extent, that in addition to the application provided by the building department, the extent and nature of the work to be done together with such necessary sketches and additional information as the building inspector may require.
Where
including
were you
zoning
reading
chart.
that one? I'm sorry.
It's
What
on the
section?
very last page.
Yeah, I'm in the last page. What
Uh,
section?
D. So.
You said D or B?
B.
B. Container, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so so it's there to also kind of give guidance for like, anybody else that comes in the future that needs to enforce that, that you're not automatically requiring surveys and, and like a lot of expense to be done, that it gives a lot of flexibility for what the building department could ask for in terms of just being able to verify.
Right. So let's say, so that's okay. The other one is obviously what happens if I'm over, sure. If I'm over my requirements, or I'm within now where I actually have to put some sort of stormwater containment within my own property. What is the process then?
So if what they're proposing exceeds the maximum impervious surface coverage that they're allowed to do, then they're gonna have to have a stormwater plan.
What does that mean? I know what that means. I just want to hear from you.
So they'll have to present something from a design professional saying how you're gonna mitigate the stormwater on your property, whether you have to put in some sort of Coltech system, whether you get permission to put in drainage that you can hook up into the village's stormwater system. But somebody would have to make that determination,
Who's that somebody?
usually either an architect or engineer.
So now what happens, you get that professional and then applies for a building permit to your department, and then you guys review it and it gets approved? Or do you actually have to go to the architectural review board?
No, you'd have to
And-
go, if you went over the impervious surface coverage, you'd be in front of the zoning.
So, well, the zoning board, but then a site plan approval needs to be happening, correct?
Not for that, because site plan approvals are exempt, say on 1 and 2 family homes.
But not for a commercial.
Right, commercial, any changes on that go to.
They have to go in front of it. Okay.
Site plan.
So then obviously it goes through the zoning board, it goes to Public Works, more or less, to get
Well,
approval.
if
They're
it go-
going,
if
it was
it
going
goes
to
to site plan approval, then that'll be reviewed by the
consultant. Okay, so it becomes a process. It
Yeah.
becomes at least 3-month process. More or
If
less.
it's a commercial property, yeah.
No,
because you're
but
changing
for,
the
yeah, for residential, if I'm going over, I have to go to zoning,
You'd
correct?
go to zoning if it was a 1 or 2 family home.
But who reviews after the approval? Let's say they approve all that stuff from zoning, who approves that? Because it's not you, you still send it out to the consultant. for
If,
stormwater.
if it's a single family, 2-family home and they have to get a design professional involved, they're gonna provide all those calculations for the stormwater, so.
And you department will be able to
And
verify
then we'll
that
be able to verify that.
without sending that to consultants.
That's right.
Okay, so it's still about 2-month process.
Yeah,
Maybe.
because if you had to
Actually,
get a
3
zoning
months.
variance, you'd have to submit your application
Uh-huh.
by a deadline, then by the time you actually get in front of the zoning board, it's probably about 6 weeks after the
Okay,
application.
so they really have to think about increasing the size.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But,
And
but
then-
again, that's all discussed before, so the homeowner has the
course.
opportunity if they want to continue through with that, or if they want to make some modifications.
Correct. And I think that other questions, not for you or staff, it was more towards the board. I guess we were looking at the fees, and that was one thing that I guess either we talk about it now or we talk about it on budget in November, and what is the fee should be for an application like this. So, but that's all I have for now. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Joe.
Anybody else? Okay, so I think Manny asked some of my questions. The end result here is that we don't want overbuilding. 2 reasons. Number one, it's one of the ways that people are now renting out multiple units in single family homes that aren't supposed to have been done that way. And we're seeing more and more of that. So I actually prefer that we not charge any filing fees to the people that want to do it. I want to encourage people to those that simply want to increase their parking spaces, and they're allowed to. They have, as you said, Joe, you look at the plan and you say, yeah, you have 4 more feet on each side of what you currently have, or you can build this or that because it's within the sizing, right? In plain English. So there'll be a group. I don't know if that's 20% of the asks or 50% or 70%. I don't know. We don't know till we go through it, I think. So that's one group, right? They're totally within their rights. They can do it. That should go relatively quickly. They should just, somebody needs to file it so that we have records of what, this looks like, because frankly, driveways sort of look like, hey, they're part of the yard. They're not part of the yard. They're actually like garages and decks and everything else. They're actually construction. I don't want to charge anything. I know we do fees at the end of the year, but I want to make this as easy and inexpensive as absolutely possible, because I think it's, from my point, it's both an environmental issue. We talk so much about the environment, but this actually is a big part. It also, what people do on one property affects their neighbors all around them, because we live on so many hills that where water travels, because one of our neighbors decides to do something, actually affects other people. And so I want to encourage people to be, good citizens and put in these requests and come in and say, yeah, I have space for X, Y, and Z. I want to do it. I'm, all good, and not have to pay anything for that. Then there's the group that want to expand beyond what I would call is of right? That requires more of a process. Again, I'm not sure about that we need to discuss further. But in the first group, for sure, I just feel like let's make it absolutely as easy as possible. There is also a group that I thought we were doing an inventory on all this stuff, or we're thinking of doing an inventory. Joe, is that something that was done or not? Or am I just imagining it?
We were doing some of this as part of overnight parking.
Right. Okay. So we'll get some information that way, because I want to encourage people to say, look, I legitimately have room. There's another group, and that is the group that either have driveways or have room for driveways, who have chosen to make a bigger yard for themselves and make their tenants park on public streets, and in fact advertise that. So I want somehow to also make this very inexpensive for them to put in the appropriate driveways. If they have the room and they have part of a driveway that has over the years been cut off, so it looks like now there's no driveway, even though they have room for a driveway. So that's sort of like in theory where I'd like to go. So I just wanted to make that as a public comment. But as far as what you're discussing tonight, I think it's pretty inclusive of what we've been discussing. So I would say let's move forward. And again, this may be one of those things that should be communicated to the public more than just as an agenda item that then gets approved into something and nobody knows about it. People should know about it. Because I think there are a lot of people that just aren't aware that this exists. And we'll deal with the 80% that are good characters and then deal with the 20% that are purposefully not good characters in what they're doing. But at least now it'll be in writing and you guys could start enforcing more of this. I think we discussed this as far back as a year ago. Joe had brought this to our attention. Does anybody have, those were just not really questions, but more of comments. Anybody else? Can't see.
And
Okay.
just want, yeah, just Mayor, I just want
Oh,
to
there
piggyback
is
that
more?
one. Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what you said. Actually, that was one of the things that we did talk about, not charging a fee last time.
Mhm.
Obviously, if you go to a zoning board, that sort of, you have to pay the application fee at that point, sure, and you'll pay the rest of it as you go. But I think the application for repaving your driveway, they may be adding portions as long as you stay within your percentage allowable on that. I think that I'm okay. I'm definitely in agreement with that too. So
The
Okay.
only thing I would consider is, we have right now in the fee schedule where if somebody actually does any type of work, construction work, electrical, so forth, without pulling the permit first, they actually pay a different fee for that permit. So it's, I'm agreeing with, the
I'm
fact
sorry, which is what? What is the fee that they
which
pay?
the person pays $1,000 or 3 times the fee, whatever is greater. So
No,
if you,
I'm talking about like this, maybe I misunderstood you. So
what I'm saying is if somebody obviously comes in before they do the work and they want to take a permit and you don't want to charge a fee, that's fine. The board can choose to do that. But if somebody says, well, I didn't pull the permit and yes, I installed everything I was supposed to do, and they caught me later, we would say just come in and take the permit. No, you don't pay any type of fee for that. So I would think that, it may be something to be allowed if you take the permit before you do the installation, but if you do the installation, there should be some type of fee to be paid because you took.
So
the
it's a
risk.
punitive issue that you
That-
either have to
that's
put it
more of
back to
a-
the original state or you
violation,
have to pay a
correct?
fee because you
Well-
went on and did it and got a permit after the fact. That's what you're
Well,
saying.
in all of our permits right now, be it for tree permits, for building permits, electrical, plumbing, if you, right now, the way it's written in the fee schedule is if you get caught by code enforcement for doing something without taking the permit, you pay $1,000 for that permit rather than
Correct.
the fee you would pay.
Got it. Okay,
3
so we'll
times.
include that in our fee
So-
discussion. I
so-
understood.
Yeah,
Okay.
And-
I
and
don't
it-
think that would
There's
necessarily.
the before and after scenario,
Yeah.
right? I'm a
and-
good character. I did what I'm supposed to. I don't pay. I
Yeah.
did it, and after the fact went to you, and my only choices are to tear up the whole thing or to pay a fee. We charge fees because it's more of a punitive. All right, so we can discuss that in the fees.
Yeah, but I think part of that, we can also discuss a grace period. We
Yeah.
can say in the next 6 months, if you do this, there's no penalty. But after 6 months, there's $1,000. It goes back to that. So, but that's something we can talk about.
Certainly can talk about.
That could be part of the, yeah.
leniency, given we have to take some time to create some awareness. So I think we have ways to be able to do that. And as the mayor said, incentivize people doing the right thing and doing it well and discouraging the smaller percentage of people who maybe don't have the same intentions.
Understood. I agree.
Okay,
All right. Well, I want to thank Valerie and Joe for their time tonight. We covered a lot of ground, got a lot done. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to ask our village engineer and head of public works up. Joe is going to stay with us, but we also have our foreman Mike Duffy here as well to talk about. They actually have a presentation on front yard parking where parking spaces have encroached on the right of way for various different reasons over the years. So we were going to take you on a tour of those locations.
How's that? Yep. Good evening, Mayor, Board. Maddie, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Hi. Can you just pull up maybe the first picture of the set of photos we gave you? Perfect. And then, bless you. You can go back one more just to keep the title there because I wasn't going to talk. So I'm going to do a little introduction on top of what the manager just did and talk a little bit about the genesis of how we got here to discuss this issue. In some ways, it's related to what you've just been hearing from our planner and our building inspector. In other ways, it's not related, but the issues all boil down to the same code concerns that we all have for various lots throughout the village. So, as you know, in the past few months with the police department, Public Works has been working in concert with them to reinforce parking restrictions throughout the village. All types of parking restrictions, including overnight parking, parking too close to the corner, no parking violations, and any assortment of those all have an impact on our operation. And there's reasons that we don't want folks violating the parking ordinances that we have in place right now. In addition to the parking ordinances, there's also code violations, which is going to be the crux of this presentation. But the ordinances are what really brought it to fruition to come as a topic in front of you tonight. Like I started to say, a couple of months ago, we started working in concert with the police department and reinforcing areas where present code calls for no parking or alternate side parking, and reinforce V&T laws with regard to parking too close to the corner. That was a subject that myself and some of the DPW folks were in here presenting a few months back, because it did cause a little bit of a stir, because there were some areas in the village that actually did not have adequate indication that there was no parking, and it was really an epiphany for some people that the present code indicated that there was no parking in front of their residence, which they were used to doing for many years prior, whether they were violating a sign or whether there was no sign there. And I'm going to show you some of those examples in the pictures too. But I'd really like to do the pictures last. I want to turn it over to Mike for a little bit here. He's going to talk a little bit about why this issue that we're going to review in pictures is so important to us with regard to our public works operation. And then we're going to come back to me and we're going to do a real one sentence per picture rifle through these photos, because as the mayor said, in I think one presentation ago, it's good for the public to be able to, I think she said, see exactly what we're talking about. You're going to see in these pictures exactly what we're talking about. It is a quick drive-by inventory. It's surely not every example in the village that exists, but it's certainly a pretty comprehensive village-wide example of the different levels of code violation that we have going on in front of the residences. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike for now.
Good evening. With these spaces, like Paul just said, it brings DPW especially some challenges and some obstacles. So, what it does is presents now these cars that were never there are there, which gives us, like during snow, like Ferris Place is one where they park on both sides of the street. We have to deal with that. The places that there's no parking, they're now parking up over the curbs. So there's no place for us to put it. It ends up being out in the street, which shouldn't be. Street sweeper now has obstacles again. With the snow, they end up, when they clean these spaces that they created, it ends up back in the street, which is a V&T issue. So again, it just, it creates many challenges. A lot of the places where the curbs have been removed, now we have, water issues from neighbors, and, the curbs are meant for the water to get down to the basins to do their jobs. And so it's all together, but with a lot of these spaces, like I drove around and personally took a lot of these pictures, and, every one of them almost has like a story behind them, because you could tell, but every challenge that's there about them. So that's what it basically put together, like I said, and, it leads to code violations for Joe and et cetera, et cetera. So,
We're still on the title page.
Thank you, Mike. So, yeah, as I was saying in the beginning, what I'd like to do now, Maddie, is with that brief introduction that we gave, is just flip through some touch and feel pictures here. And Maddie, as we flip through, I'm just going to give, a quick description of what exists in the picture. And we're going to get a real good idea of why we're saying what we're saying and the issues that these conditions present. So if you want to go to the first photo,
You got it.
thanks.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay on my end, so just please be patient.
Okay, here you have an example of where someone to the side of their house, away from the front of their house, they're parking in the right of way. This is off the curb line. The curb has clearly been removed. You could see what a curb is intended to do. It's intended to channel water into that catch basin, but this residence over time has become a off-street parking area, which would be a site plan violation here. And
You should also point out that that building to the right is actually a garage. It's not like there isn't parking for the house. There's actually a garage right behind the blue car.
yeah. Okay. Actually, I'm glad you said that, because I do want to give one open-ended statement with regard to all these pictures. We don't know for certain, because we haven't done surveys and overlays, that this is actually a site plan violation. We don't know for certain that it's specifically in the right of way. However, generally speaking, these are the type of issues that exist that
Right.
we need to address. That's why there's so many pictures, because there is no one size fits all issue. These are all independent issues with independent considerations of code violation. Go ahead, next one. Okay, here you could see towards the utility pole that you see on the left side of the photo, you could see in advance of that, there's been a little divergence from the existing curb line, that where someone's created a paved area in front of their house. That is not, there's no continuity with the curb line on that road on Sarah Street.
and no park.
And
What
there's no
street is
park.
that? I'm sorry, what street is
Let's look
that?
back. And there's no parking for that entire length of the road on that side, but yet cars do park in that spot. Go ahead. This is just a general, you can see where the curb was removed, so stormwater obviously is not going to stay in the road in this condition, but someone is parking on their lawn.
Well, I don't want to interrupt. That's actually private property. So I just wanted to be clear.
Okay, but again, as a private property issue, I'm gonna say that this is possibly an issue where someone's parking on their front lawn without that being approved, private property or not, which is a code violation. Go ahead.
Over here anyway, that the portion of that curb was removed, parking prior
Right,
where the car is parked now, but if you go to the previous picture, it looks like there was some spot that's already been removed, like that's part of
Yeah.
the curb.
Right, that's what I'm getting at. There's a full length of curb there. There's a car parked in the grass, and there's obviously
they
some type
removed
of,
it. And there's a
paved area.
driveway to the house, and there's a driveway on both sides.
right. Okay, next. Meadowbrook, this is one of a few on Meadowbrook where there is an existing curb cut for a driveway, but that curb cut has been expanded to allow for parking, likely in the right of way in this condition here. And this Meadowbrook is on a hill. It's not a flat area. We have stormwater issues on Meadowbrook and the roads below Meadowbrook. And sometimes when the curb is compromised like this during heavy storms, when there is water built up in the gutter, it does jump over the curbs when they're not left at the height that we desire. Next. Meadowbrook, next. Iroquois, you could see where they have a curb and they have a drop curb, probably larger than they should. It looks like they put a fence there, but it looks like they're still likely in the right of way with whatever structure and vehicle that they're possibly parking there on the overnight. Next. Claremont Road, this isn't paved, but it is an area where they're clearly parking, and that's likely in the right of way. Again, on Meadowbrook, same issue. Next. Brander Street. This is one I was discussing with the manager actually earlier when we were reviewing the site for the parking structure. There's a multifamily building to the left of this. They were in front of planning for some time with regard to parking and possible access to the rear of their lot for parking. None of that ever came to fruition. So the solution, not approved, was to put in temporary ramps over an existing curb line, put some type of suitable material there, and now they're jumping the curb on public property and traveling over public property to get to the rear of their lot to park their vehicles.
Paul, those ramps, are they concrete or they're temporary?
They're temporary. We could probably
That's
go
our
remove it.
property, so you could just remove those ramps, right?
It seems that way. I don't think we've tried to
That's our
yet.
property, not
Yes.
theirs. Okay.
Yes. Hudson Street, you were talking about it in the early agenda items, areas where multifamily houses are prevalent.
Yeah.
Parking becomes an issue, and it seems, and this may very well have site plan approval, but you can see there's no curb here, and the entire front parcel is paved here with multiple spots, parking possibly in the right of way, possibly on private property, but either way, the entire front yard appears to be paved.
Is there any drainage? Is that thing in the bottom right-hand corner of the picture, is that drainage or it's just a gray, darker gray area?
I think it's just a dark, I think that's the top of a garbage can that you see.
That goes down
Yeah.
Broad Street, that end.
Oh, okay.
Next. Camp Woods Road.
Yep.
This is a very large paved area where, so be it, there may not be, parking here that you see during the day. I don't know what really happens at night, but it is an area of where the full right of way is paved versus just the access to the rear lot that exists in this building. Mohegan, this is really the one that started it all. This entire right side of the road that you can see in the picture is presently coded as no parking for the entire side. You're allowed to park on the other side of the road. There's been a complete curb removal for the length of 2 or 3 lots and a new curb put there where overnight parking exists for these residents or anybody. I can't say it's the residents for sure, but cars do park there overnight.
So somebody just did this.
Not just did this.
No, but if some individuals are decided to just pave this, do
Yeah.
this.
I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say it exists. I don't know who did it.
No,
As far as I
somebody didn't
know,
do it
could have
itself.
been, it could have been done by Public Works,
Oh, okay.
but I could tell you that it preceded my tenure
Mhm.
and it exists now. And
How long have you been with us,
needs to be
Paul?
rectified. 20 something. I don't know
All right, so
exactly.
more than
23.
20-something years ago, this was done by someone.
Yeah, and so you basically have a paved right of way that's being utilized. And this is just creates a myriad of reasons. We don't really street sweep in there. When we plow, the curbs are there for not just stormwater, but they're there for the street sweeper. They're there to guide the plow. They're there to do a lot of things, proper road width. And any variance from there doesn't work. So this is another area where we have to consider what to do here. First of all, you're not supposed to be parking there at all. So, but that restriction is really for the road. So if you're parking in the curb, then it becomes it's issues as we've showed you already, but this one is issues times 10
Okay.
consecutively. Next. Fairview Place, this is a dead end, and you can see where the dead end goes to like a little wooded area. And the car is just, I believe it's a stone area. It's not really paved, but they're parking off in the right of way.
And in front of a hydrant, but that's.
And the hydrant.
Yeah.
The hydrant.
Next. Lavelle, same thing. They have a driveway, as you can see, with a curb for that driveway, but yet they expanded their driveway to include a parallel spot where there's no parking on that side of the road. Next. Ryder Road. This is actually a county road, but we put it in here anyway because it's a village lot. They basically paved about 20 feet in from what I'm
Jesus.
going to estimate is the county right of way. The entire length of both of those lots is all paved.
Wow.
Next. Cedar Lane. There's multiple pictures on Cedar Lane. Again, multi-family area. And this is maybe the most egregious one of the Cedar Lane parcels because the entire front of the parcel, again, may have site plan approval, may have no site plan approval, but the entire front of this yard is, I think that's concrete actually. It's not bituminous concrete, it's actual concrete. And you can see the curb lines compromised because they facilitated to facilitate
And this is all, is
access.
Cedar Lane in that section a multifamily zone or single home?
I don't know the zoning off the top of my head in that area.
Yeah, and it's a two-family. I think in some parts it's single family, two-family, but there's a lot of homes in there that are non-conforming pre-existing uses.
No, I got that. You could see that it's multifamily. I just want to know what the actual rule is, whether it's single or two-family. You could just look at this and know it's multifamily, more than two. Okay.
Next. Again, Cedar Lane, same issue. They have a driveway you can see towards the front of the photo. And then as you look deeper into the photo, you can see, you can see where that manhole is. Manholes are typically in the right of way, and you can see the entire front of the parcel.
Mm-hmm.
Facilitates parking. Next. Overton Underhill side. Same thing. It's a paved surface where it seems to be facilitating off-street parking where there is no parking. Next. Cedar Lane, same issue. Next. Hudson Street. You can see a driveway with a Belgian block on the right, but additional cars necessary for whoever lives there, I'm assuming, has dropped the curb for the entire length and facilitates parking, possibly in the right of way. And if not the right of way, certainly the more than the area that's paved for their garage, their front yard or their side yard. Next. This is on Mohegan, but the parcel actually is addressed on Croton Avenue. There's a garage, and the access to that garage is right through where the garbage can is in the forefront of the photo. But then they expanded the parking to go into a off-street parking area, again, possibly in the right of way, along with that stone structure that you see, again, possibly in the right of way. You can see the existing curb line that was set by that catch basin there has obviously been compromised. He actually has the driveway encroaching into the road where, when you go down those areas with a plow, very often the plow will hit that driveway and break the blacktop that's been pushed into the road because it's hard to follow the line when the line is so, it deviates like that based on some of the alterations made on that lot. Next.
He also has a additional driveway. If you look to the far left, the parking sign, that's a driveway on the Croton Avenue side. So we've got two full driveways.
Oh, yeah. It's got multiple, actually. There's another one going down.
Theoretically, you got.
Because this has been turned into multifamily. This is not a single family
Yeah.
or two family. Oh,
Then he has a yard in the front.
I don't know who's talking, but they're not talking into a mic.
Pine Avenue, this is an area where you can see there is a drop curb, which looks like a garage that is in concert with the drop curb, but it looks like they're also parking an additional vehicle, possibly in the right of way and in their front yard on the grass. Another code violation. Cedar Lane, same issue as the other Cedar Lanes. This is not concrete and blacktop, but there's still parking there.
Can
Next.
you zoom into on the tree, whatever's stapled on there?
I see that it says no parking. I don't know if I can, oh, hold on. Yeah, is that better?
No, because it just gets fuzzy. I just love the
Yeah.
fact that there's actually somebody that's stuck onto a tree. Some
That's
sort of
not a village sign, I
so
can tell you that.
There's something underneath it, so I don't know what it says. Okay.
These signs on a pole.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Next. Snowden Avenue. again, looks like a driveway that is in line with their garage, which is fine for code. It looks like there's a drop curb to facilitate that, but then again, it looks like the drop curb was extended to facilitate additional off-street parking in an area where there is no parking. And again, likely in the right of way. Next. Cedar Lane. Cedar Lane is our winner tonight because they're so dense and there were so many of the same issues, so we can same thing. Next. Cedar Lane. Cedar Lane. And this is a little overgrown, but there's still an area. Okay, on Broadway. Oh, go back to Broadway. So Broadway, you could see there was obviously some thought process here. Again, I don't know how or when it happened, but it looks like when the concrete curb was done in the road, it looks like it was also done to facilitate this off-street parking, which I don't believe is appropriate. So
Well,
another
good looking though. Somebody definitely planned their landscaping.
next. This is again an issue on Dale Avenue where I'm not sure how they're accessing this. They're probably going around the front end of that little chain link detail, but they're parking on the lawn overnight in the front yard. It's code violation. Next. Pine Avenue, there's apparent parking going on here. There wasn't a car there when Michael took the picture, but you could see what that does to the front yard when they park there. Next. Highland Avenue, same issue. This is right. This is really, that's on Beach Road, actually, where it's parked, but it's right off a Highland Avenue address. And you could see based on the tire tracks and the lack of vegetation that this is not a one-time event. And you can see the no parking sign clearly indicated there, which is being violated. Next. Spring Street and Fairview, this is a little congested road where there's obviously been some curb removed to facilitate parking there and obviously some vegetation growth issues. Next. Broad Street, this is down off of Hudson by the prison. You could see the large parcel that is a semblance of block and stone. I believe this is actually Department of Corrections property. It's not village property, but parking has developed there. And we're not sure if it's state employees parking there. We believe it's residences, but people are parking there. Next. Fairview Place at the very end. There's spots been cleared in the I'm sorry, that's at the bend, right? And there's been a spot cleared out of the right of way, and there's a car that's left there to park there.
Is that a no parking sign amongst all those?
Yeah, yes, which, you know, technically the car is probably out of the paved area of the road.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Which could possibly, you know, not make no parking enforceable. But if it's parking in the yard, then that is enforceable,
Right.
particularly if it's a site plan violation.
Okay.
Next. We're gonna do 3 Ramapos in a row right now. This Ramapo for this, I believe it's the west side of Ramapo, if you will. So if you're coming from Camp Woods onto Ramapo, this will be on the right side of the street. There's 3 parcels there that all basically have the same installation. So if you just want to click through them, and I'll stop at the last one to talk. There's this one, that one, and that one. There is paved area in front of those parcels. Again, possibly on private property, possibly on the right of way. Without a survey, we can't tell, but the paved area exists on a street like a lot of the others we showed you tonight, where there's no parking in the ordinance for that side of the road. So in order to facilitate the parking for those parcels, in addition to their driveways and garages, these spots were created and cars do park there
And all
overnight.
those houses have
Impossible.
driveways and parking behind the houses.
I'm not sure about behind the houses, but they do all have driveways.
So I drive by there every day.
Next. That's the last one. So again, that's a pretty comprehensive list. I thank Mike and his team for doing that. He did, you know, navigate the entire village, every street. So the ones that jumped out, they took pictures. It's probably not all of them. But all the issues vary. They vary from a simple, someone's parking on the grass in front of their yard to someone has created, very permanent and established areas where they park. And again, every issue is different. So in discussions with the manager before coming to you all this evening, I guess what we really want to get a sense from the board is what should be our next steps. There's mechanisms in place right now with the existing code, I think, to start dealing individually with each property owner. However, the bigger conversation is the parking issue, which again, you talked about before I was on tonight. So maybe it's almost a good idea that I was last, because you got to understand the crux behind a lot of these parking spaces getting developed, because people do need places to park. But the flip side is it's really not in the code, and maybe not fair that, why does one resident get to do that in front of their house? I could have done that too, but instead I decided to go to planning and build a garage and expand my driveway and go that way. But there's no one size fits all solution here. It will be an individual solution if we did decide to remediate all of these in the village. That undertaking would be extraordinary, time-wise, and cost-wise. And depending if you did end up in court, what the court would end up reimbursing to the village for the cost associated with surveying, and if the village did end up undertaking the remediation, that's going to have a cost. So you really have to have some mechanisms in place. I would hope to have some mechanisms in place to understand that the courts would understand the potential cost and help us recoup that. But if that's not the case, and the other end of the spectrum is you say, you know what, we understand why they did what they did. Let's make the ones that are grandfatherable, if you will, grandfathered, and leave them. Make the ones that need a little tweaking to be grandfatherable, grandfather them, and let them keep doing what they're doing. Or not that we want to do this, or this is a recommendation from my side, just leave it alone and let bygones be bygones. They've been there for as long as they have. Some been there a week, some have been there 30 years in a week, and you move forward and you just give the edict to code enforcement and public works where this is it. The ones that exist that you know about exist. You see a new one, don't allow it to exist.
Okay, are you guys done?
I am.
Okay. Thank you. That was super helpful. I know we've been asking for this for a while. I'm going to let the board speak, but I have a question. So Mike drove around and took pictures, but then I heard you say that this is not a full inventory. This is just the most egregious. So do you have an inventory of everything, or you only have this inventory?
Well, okay, let me clarify that. What I meant was I didn't want someone to watch this tonight and say, hey, where's 123 Acme Street? They're worse than any of those pictures. And if we missed it, it was an oops. We tried to catch everything, is what I should have said. If we did miss one or two, then.
So would you say that in the best effort, knowing that you didn't get 100%, that this is actually, it's not just pictures of examples, but it's an actual inventory?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, clearly you probably missed one or two, we understand, but this is not just the most egregious, but actually the inventory that we now have with addresses and pictures to prove the claims.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree. Poor choice of words.
No, not poor at all. Actually, very accurate. I'm just getting clarification for myself. All right, members of the board, let's open this up for discussion. Thank you, Paul and Mike. Anybody?
Me right now, Mayor.
I'm sorry?
For me right now.
It's good for you right now. Okay. So this is a presentation. I don't know exactly what we're.
I said nothing for me right now.
I heard you.
Oh, I thought you said.
Nobody else is speaking either.
Thanks. So for clarity, you're looking for some direction of which way to go, right? Of saying, do we let the bygones be bygones, or do we enforce? And if so, what would that look like? Is that right?
Correct.
So I'm conflicted. I mean, if this was an easy answer, then you would already answered it. We would have moved forward. And it's difficult because there's not a circumstance in which I want to say, well, you have this whole lot of people that have very obviously violated village code. Let's let it go and then move forward. Especially because if you're just the next person, I'd be like, well, if I had just done it last week, then it would have been fine. And it can feel arbitrary, and I get that. I also don't know how much of a new issue this is. This is how much the expanse of it is, but are new ones of these cropping up? Can you give me a sense of that?
Yeah, we do catch one here and there every other day, and correct. And the way you expressed it is accurate.
Yeah. So it may be worth, and if I will give my initial assessment with the caveat that I may change my mind in a few minutes, but the way that I feel right now is I would be comfortable recognizing the administrative burden that it would take to figure out how to solve all of the existing issues that we have, saying, okay, we draw a line in the sand. We recognize that this is problematic. So moving forward, we're going to be enforcing this. And if you happen to be on this side of the line, congratulations. That's just the way it worked out. But moving forward, we're going to do something different. I personally, at this moment, would be comfortable with that. We'll see how things go. That's where I am. Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else? I can't see. You gotta
Be
speak.
clear that to go in and try and fix this problem seems enormous and time consuming and expensive and contentious, and I'm sure people have bought homes where that parking already existed, thinking that was okay. That was, okay for that to be there, that they didn't put it there, but then to go to them and say, you have to fix it. But it just also showcases just how many, many, many more cars there seem to be in the village right now. I see a lot more people parking on their lawns lately. I've seen a lot more, just something I've noticed. So, yeah, I also have a problem with people just going in and taking down curbs, which are public property, and are there for a reason and serve a purpose, and you don't want to reward that. You don't want to encourage any more of that. I think maybe look at those cases where the lack of the curb is really causing a problem. Maybe there are places where it's worse with the stormwater runoff.
Yeah, that's a Trustee White, that's a delicate one.
Yeah.
I know I said there's no one size fits all solution, and there's no solution that is, they're all like a snowflake. And
Each one is different.
yeah,
I mean, you look at Cedar Lane, they have no backyards. They're built onto a cliff, right? They have no,
I get it. And
Yeah.
it's almost a pick your poison if you're
Yeah.
gonna be a multifamily property
Right.
owner or landlord. Do you violate the right of way codes and the front yard code? Or do you pave your backyard and deal with the agenda item that was just prior to this one? Either one is something that you should try to get approved. Stewart has had a mechanism for licensing agreement in front of you a few times for issues sort of similar to this, whether, someone wanted to do something new and they were going to have a component of that new that encroached on the right of way, or someone that had something existing that we needed to rectify, and he would adopt that in his licensing agreement, like a stone wall detail or something like that, and then it would be in front of you and it would be okay. But in items like that, there's not really the issues like you mentioned, the stormwater, the snow removal, the unsightliness, quite frankly, in some instances, that exist with these issues. And again, as the mayor picked out in that one photo we showed you, she complimented how beautiful it looked because it was a concrete curb with nice landscaping. but it's still in the right of way. So that opens up, that opens up other items. You definitely don't want to condone it. You definitely don't want to accept it.
It's in the right of way. It looks like in some cases it's on the person's property.
Well, the property is,
How does that work?
Well, if I may, we have surveys. There is no question that the vast majority of these are on village-owned properties. Almost of the surveys that I received, I don't have them all. I'm looking at almost everyone is on village-owned property. You can clearly tell from the survey because it shows many of these properties actually begin where their walk is. And if you look where on the other side, that's where they've done the parking. So it's clearly village-owned property. There's no doubt about that. There's absolutely no doubt. There are a few that are questionable, but of the one.
Stuart, we lost you.
I'd say 85% of village property of the ones I've looked at.
Yeah. Because your property doesn't actually end where the grass ends. There is a piece of your front lawns, and it's different, I think, when they have sidewalks or not, that actually you take care of it, but there's pieces of it that actually belong to the municipality.
A
And-
lot of
and
these didn't seem to have sidewalks. a
well,
lot of
and
these
taking
roads.
taking
Right,
care
that's
of-
why they're on village property. That's the point.
yeah,
Because the
and,
end of their property isn't the end of their grass.
and typically when they're built, whether it's a single family lot, the sidewalk and the driveway that's associated with those lots are approved during the planning and building permit process. You're allowed to have access all the way out to the curb face. You need to take care. I think it would, the mayor said taking care of it is also the responsibility, and Stuart will correct me if I'm wrong, section 225, you have to maintain to the curb. You still have to cut whatever's there, the lawn, you have to maintain the sidewalk within your frontage, not your property line, your frontage to the curb. If that so be sits in the right of way, you still have to maintain that.
One quick question that I have is, for these properties, if they were to sell them, just because we said now, okay, we're gonna leave it as is, in the future, if they sell them, that wouldn't still be the case. Is that correct? They would need to change that in order to be able to sell the property?
I don't know how far you guys took that, that pre-sale letter. I know you were talking about having the building department issue there's no code violations on this property letter that go along with the closing documentation. I don't really know where that stands, but I would imagine if that happened in a house like this, that there would be an asterisk somewhere on that page.
Yeah, I mean, we brought up the idea of having new certificates of occupancies for sale of homes, which is still in front of the board to decide if they want to go forward with that. But if you were doing a title search, you would have to they pick it up if it was considered a violation. So we would have to mark a violation on them so they would know. You have this as an open, concern that you have to address. So we could do that, but that would be something we would have to discuss internally, how we want to approach. If the intent is that it's not something that will remain with the property from homeowner to homeowner, then we'd have to come up with an internal way with how we regulate that it would be allowed now as this owner, but somehow during a sale, it would have to be rectified.
That's helpful. That would be where I would land.
It would be like having a deck that never got a C of O, for example. It would be like,
Right, but when they would do a title search, that would
Right.
show up in there as the way it would be now, it would, this type
Just
of
wouldn't show
violation
up.
would not show on a title search unless we
Mm.
make provisions to do so, to put that on record.
Okay. Anybody else? Bob?
Yes. Well.
Oh, I thought Manny, you didn't have
okay.
anything.
No, I said no right now.
no, I was done.
So it was helpful to hear the thoughts of where other people more or less have their opinions and, how they want to solve this. And, after we got this presentation, I actually drove around the village and some of the locations in here just to get a little bit more a close look into that. There's actually a couple spots that are missing, but that's irrelevant. I was hoping to see one property in the State Street to be part of that. But that's not here and there. It's difficult because if we're gonna, one of the major photos that you had in the slideshow that you presented is Cedar Lane. And actually just double check, it is an S50 zone, which is a single family, but we have a lot of legal two families in a non-conforming zone. So if we were to do something like that, if I own one of those properties and I sell that property, so that means Omar buys the property that I sold it, that means that the parking spaces that I had there, they're no longer there. And now where's those people are going to park? Because you have very tight streets in that area. There's only one, pretty much there's only one area that you can park on the street. There's no both sides of the street. So for me, it's a difficult position to say, yes, that makes sense. It stays as long as the owner owns that property. And that to me is difficult to say that makes sense. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, we're trying to solve a problem that in a way is very complex. I mean, looking at the car that was parked right next to the fire hydrant, to me, that's a simple solution. Sure, you're not allowed to park there. Shouldn't be parked there. There's other areas where, yeah, you cannot park there. It's simple, remove those temporary, small ramps that you have. I'm not sure what the status of the site plan and what was not approved, but if it makes sense to have access to the rear, maybe there's an easement that the village can work with them so they can actually legally go through a village property to go on the back. I don't know.
I think in that particular case, Manny, respectfully, they did go in front and it never went anywhere was the comment that was.
No.
made.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, maybe there's a different solution. That's what I'm saying. I'm not sure. I mean, I will have to go back and take a look at the site plan and just talk to Joe and Valerie in more detail. And maybe there was a solution. They didn't want to take it. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with that particular case. But there are cases where it's straightforward. Sure, you should not be parking here. But there's another occasions that I think we have to be able to work. And like Paul said, let's grandfather in. When I obtain a variance, for argument's sake, the variance stays with the house, not with the property owner. So that's something that I think we should, if we're gonna try to remediate something so complex that has been happening for years, let's try to figure the simple way out on this one, and let's try to make it work. Obviously, it kind of becomes like that, the parking sign that you wanted to see on a tree. It actually says no parking, which is definitely not a village sign, is the property owner. So, I think that's something,
May I
Good.
suggest, to build on your idea, I think I know what you're trying to get to. May I offer this? Maybe the mechanism's already in place, although some of it is really, there's not much to it other than you're parking on the grass in front of your yard. That was an example of maybe a handful of the photos we showed you. But some of them are analogous to folks that have went in front of the zoning board to do what some of those pictures did legally. I could tell you one of the things that kicked off this whole search and the violations issue non-Ramapo was an application on Narragansett. Someone was parking in front of their house and looking to develop that and were stopped. They stopped, went to zoning and planning and zoning, made application, and it was approved. Maybe the answer is to go to all of these individuals and say, you have something that exists that is not in concert with our code. Here's your OTR and here's your alternatives. You remove it and restore it back to its original unscathed condition, whether it be lawn or a curb. You have to make continuity with what was there on either side, or what is there on either side in your right of way. Or you go to zoning, which we have a mechanism to do through the building department, and say, this exists, you have an OTR, we're going to give you the opportunity to take this, or we're going to give you the opportunity, this is what you need to do. You need to add a curb here, add drainage here, and do this. If you want to take that plan to zoning, we'll consider it.
Well, I think the only issue with the zoning issue is that if these are in the right of way, the zoning board doesn't have regulations.
And that comes to
No, I understand that, but you still have to go through the right of way to get to what they want. So you have to look at it and say, can you do what you want to do on your private property?
I see.
And if you can't, then it needs to come out. But if you can, trying to offer you a solution.
But there are locations in there on the presentation where there's no other way that they have to do what they have to do right now. Cedar Lane, sure. You have to park the one that you mentioned, the whole concrete in front of it. There's no really a right of way. By the time you get to the right of way, you only have about 5 feet on your property. So you have to park.
I don't really know how far the right of way shoots
Well,
into those.
more or less, so concept wise is how do you measure the right of way? So either Stuart, Joe, or you can tell me the middle of the street, sure. How far back do you guys usually go back?
It's that middle of the road is typically 50 feet on center.
Yeah.
So you're about 25 feet from the center line.
Okay, so
typically.
more or less you have about 10 feet, from your property line
Typically.
to an average. That's sort of the average, or that's the rule of thumb, more or less. So if you have 15 feet from your house, from the edge of your house to the curve, if you have 15 feet, that means that 5 feet of that is your property, the other 10 feet is village property, no matter what, sure.
Again.
So an average, yeah.
But I don't want to get people that
I know
might
that.
listen.
I know.
This is a very old village. Right of ways, very often, we're not 50 feet in a lot of the old roads and a lot of the old right of ways.
That's what I'm saying. The rule of thumb is more or less that. So there's a big portion of that doesn't belong to you. Just like when I live in the Spring Street, I know the sidewalk doesn't belong to me. Sure, where my small stone wall is, that's sort of where it starts my property back. But I know it's defined, and areas where you have a sidewalk is more or less defined where your property line is in front of your house. In this case, it's not really defined. You have a buffer area that belongs to the village. So I think that to me is difficult. So even though I agree with you, I'm not in agreement 100% because there are cases that you have to look at in a different perspective.
I think though, like Paul had brought up, that each case has got an individual different thing. So some people are parking, or created parking in the right of way, but do have the ability to say, like you had already mentioned, well, why don't I create that parking space on the front yard of my property and go in front of the zoning board and see if you can get that variance? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the right of way. And then when you're talking about Cedar Lane, that option may not.
So what do you do in those cases?
Well, I would say in a place like Cedar Lane, you don't really have much of a front yard because of the proximity of the homes to the street. So the option of bringing that to front of the zoning board may not be.
So it comes in
You could
front of
do-
the
so in
village
that
board.
case, You could
Yeah.
say, well, in this case, maybe village board would say that's acceptable and we can accept that. But in some other cases where you have on Pine Avenue and so forth, the homes are set back where you look, if you need to park in your front yard, apply to the zoning board and put your parking off of the village's property and put it on your property. So it's a case by case basis.
No, that's what I'm saying. It becomes very
Okay.
complex to try to fix some of the stuff, but it's not a fix, a one application fits all, sure. So
Okay,
who's gonna be doing that?
I think we
homework?
recognize that, but board after board has avoided this topic. What we do know is this is a chicken and egg conversation, and one size is not going to fit all. But if this were easy, as was stated earlier, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Of course, it's not easy, and people have just kept pushing this and kicking the can down the road, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse. It's not just that it looks bad, it's damaging to the environment, it's damaging to other people's homes that live around there. It's unfair to the people who follow rules and don't do this stuff. It's unfair to people who park in their driveways and actually use their garages, not for storage, but to keep their car so they're not parking on the street. It's unfair to a person who buys a single family home in a single family zone, and two of their neighbors decided to move to Florida and turn their homes into a business for themselves and have tenants parking on the street so that when you want to use it, there's no room. And they publicize their homes that way. There's a fairness and an unfairness to a lot of people. What I believe to be true is this is not just a parking issue. This is an abuse of the homes in the village. It's abusive to public space because all those spaces that are in the right of way, technically, Anybody can park in it, not just a homeowner who created that spot. That actually doesn't belong to the homeowner. People can actually park there, to be honest, because they're actually using the public space for that. It's not fair to people who are trying to sell single-family homes who may have their value either go up or down depending on what their neighbor's property looks like. So it's like, what do you do with complex scenarios? For me, I always break it down into compartments. I don't think we're going to hit 100%. I don't even know if we'll hit 50%. But I do think there's a bucket, a small bucket, but nevertheless a bucket that every single parked on places that literally have a sign that says no parking, that is, you know, somebody like that car that pulls up every night and parks on our property. It's clearly not a space. They didn't even bother making it a space. That somebody put ramps up so people can go park. All of that stuff, people parking on their lawn, especially when there are driveways right next to it, all of those folks need to be ticketed immediately, day in, day out, every day of the week. And that's because what they're doing is already illegal. They've basically created the scenario. For me, this is a part of overcrowded housing issues, is that landlords, because I don't believe that most of these properties are single family or even two families living there, that they need 6 cars parked in the front, or that they've turned all the spaces. And in Pocantico and some of these others, they have driveways, they have parking in the back. The garages oftentimes aren't even used for cars. They should be. Joe made a great point about a year ago, and I'll never forget it. His point is people who have room for driveways and have garages should be using them. If you have room for a driveway, but instead have people parked on the grass, we should be telling you that you're not allowed to park on the grass. Go put in a driveway the way you're supposed to, or open up what used to be a driveway that you've now turned into a patio because you felt like it. Or most of these are actually multifamily. You could see that it's multifamily. The judge may not be able to see it, but every person living in those neighborhoods knows that. So I think we have to be realistic. Number one, all this grass parking and parking illegally at dead ends, you know, at those cul-de-sac, those people should be ticketed every day because enough is enough and they know it. And it's not fair to the neighbors who don't do that. So to me, that's a bucket. I wish it was a big bucket, but I think Paul is very clear. That's like a small bucket. The ones that are, that literally cut our curbs and made like parking lots, you know, those I think are really egregious. The hard ones are the ones where it's one spot here and there. And the ones that are really old. I like Omar's idea that when people sell their property, they're going to be told, the community is going to be told that you have to put it back to the way it's supposed to be, because what is there is illegal. Now, you may not be the person who made it illegal. The problem I think we have as a municipality is we don't know who did some of this stuff, right? So we could pass a law that says effective this and this date, you can't do that. So that's a resolution right there. We could say no parking is allowed on grass, private, public, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to park. You can't take our curbs out. Like, I don't even know if people understand that when they put a driveway, they can't just have their contractor drill through the curb, like, unless they have permits to do that. You can't remove curbs, right? So I think there are a couple of buckets that are low-hanging fruit, and I like the idea, although I want to think about it more, that when you sell the property, so when you buy a 2-family home and I look at how many cars are there and how many mailboxes are there and all the other stuff, there's no way that's 2-family. And I'm going to have the argument, oh, I have a lot of kids, I have a lot of family. I've heard all this discussion, yet every neighbor on that street knows that's actually not the case. And when I got a complaint from Bell Avenue about parking, I said to the person, why don't you call the landlord? Because when they rented it out to you, they're not allowed to actually tell you that in front of the house, it includes parking in front of the house, because in front of the house, that doesn't belong to the landlord who is charging you rent. And he should be supplying you, when he got permission to extend a house, he also was supposed to supply parking with that extension. So I think that there's a couple of low-hanging fruit. Maybe that resolves 40% for me. I do want to think more about when people sell their homes, because there's no question in my mind that even the two families or more than two families living there. And a person bought a two-family. I don't know whether they live there or not, but it is what it is. I do think it's really hard to go back in time because we don't have records of when this stuff was done. And it really is reasonable to believe that people bought a place believing they have X number of spots, including from their homes, when they took the calculation of buying that house, right? And that's really tough. But when you sell it, you have to be told what it's supposed to be. And when you sell it, and we would do that, as Dana had said, if you decided to add a nice big deck that you enjoyed for 15 years, if you didn't get a permit for that, you got to take that down. It doesn't belong there. You never got a permit. You shouldn't have done it in the first place, whether you knew that or not. So I understand all the conflicts, but for me, conflicts are things that you resolve as best you can, and as fairly and equitably across the entire community as you can. There are some challenging streets, but because there are a couple of really challenging streets doesn't mean that the other 90% should be allowed to have stuff happen like this. Because as was mentioned, like, why shouldn't somebody else just do that? You know, I get tired of rewarding bad behavior um, and making people who follow good behavior actually suffer. It becomes somewhat of a, like, it doesn't feel right to me, and I think many members of the community would agree with that. Joe's idea of if they can have a driveway and they're supposed to, and that's where tenants should be parked, and that's where people should be parked, people should be forced to do that. There might be scenarios, Paul, where you could look at some of the curbs that are so egregious that they actually are creating water problems. We might be able to figure out a way to say that if it creates a water problem of some sort, like if it's an actual problem for us to clean the streets or for the water to go where it's supposed to, that the village has the right to ask you to, or the village will have to put the curb in. I don't know if we ask or if we just do. That might be another bucket that might resolve some of the things. Maybe that adds a 60% solution to the problem. I don't think we're going to hit 100%, but I would settle for 60%. Does that give you any direction at all? I mean, what do other people think? I'm actually doing a cumulative of all the board members and the conversations that we just had.
I think that, putting them into buckets, to use your word, is probably not a bad idea. But I think there has to be one bucket where all of them exist, and as a jumping off point to get to the individual buckets. And that's the bucket of the engagement with the property owner. And whether that engagement is a friendly knock on the door and say, we have a condition, you're in violation of this, and this, or it's an actual OTR, we could talk about. I would recommend that if you're going to go down the possible bucket of making it a something that is rectified prior to a sale of a property, as the building inspector mentioned prior, unless you have an OTR or some type of legal document hanging over that property, there's nothing that's going to come up in a title search for as a stopgap during a sale, particularly if it's a cash sale. It's just going to go right. It's going to exchange hands the property, and if there's no records in the building department to indicate that there's anything wrong with the parcel. Correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but you don't go out and inspect the house prior to the sale. You inspect your records, correct? So that's
Actually, if the way it is right now is if the home has a certificate of occupancy when it was constructed. They'll do a title search, and if they see no violations, no open permits, it's clear title.
right. So that deck is okay too. If they built it and it just exists.
If they, unless, when they, if a potential buyer says, hey, I see a deck here, but I don't see the permit for it, and requests a certificate for it, that can hold it up if the buyer says, well, get this legalized or take it down.
Right.
But the title search company is gonna check to see if there's any open violations or any open permits.
So just again, but if if we go around with code enforcement and hang an OTR on all these issues, it's not to say that, you know, the OTR means that you're gonna go right to court and you're gonna go right to violation. Most of the time, the judge asks for remediation or mediation between the village and the property owner. And that's the mechanisms we need. And I think that mechanism needs to be formalized. Again, if it's as simple as parking in the grass, the OTR is rectified, you go in front of the judge and the OTR is settled.
Can we tell people what an OTR is? I don't know if anybody's watching and they don't know what that is.
It's an
It's
order-
order to remedy,
Order
right?
to remedy.
That means you gotta fix this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you,
all right.
but with the order to remedy, you know, the order to remedy gives you a duration of time to correct your violation. So, you know, I'm not 100% sure if we just put an order to remedy open-ended until you sell that property. I mean, the question would be, is you were given an order to remedy for a certain amount of time. Is that amount of time meaning 10 years, 20 years? So I would think if we write a violation for something of that sort, that and we say you have 30 days and you don't do it, it's our obligation to say the next step is you go in front of town court.
Okay, something to think about. And I'm sure Stuart can look into that, whether you can do an infinite or until the sale of the property. If that's something we're interested in. The grass parking is already in place. People aren't supposed to do that. They may not know that. And I like Paul's idea that speak to the property owner if possible. That
Yeah, but
resolves
The
probably a bunch
OTR
of
can go in a
cases.
file and it'll stay open till the sale, correct?
Well, but when we
With the
write,
explanation that
when
they
we write
ordered
an order-
remedy, that by the time they sell a house, it's gotta be remedied.
well, the order to remedy, normally the way that we write an order to remedy based on like violations of the state is you have 30 days to correct it.
Right,
So-
I understand that
so
part.
we
What I'm saying,
open-
we're talking about something, we're not gonna tell these people in 30 days they gotta fix that, like on Broadway. And that's a fancy parking lot he put in. Right, we're not gonna tell him he's gotta fix that in 30 days, but on the sale of the house, they should be able to fix it. So it should pop up on the title search or however you're gonna set it up, that this is how it's gotta get taken care of before you sell a house. You can keep it.
The only point to make though, trustee Fritchie, is the situation like on Broadway, it's not a violation of the village code. It's not for an order to remedy, because it's off the property. There's nothing that the building department would write. It's not a violation.
What was that? I don't remember that address.
Because
What
it's
was
on
that?
village right away.
That has nothing to do with the building department. They wouldn't write, there's no order to remedy. There's nothing the building department could direct them to remedy.
Right, so to clarify that, because it's on village property,
Correct.
there's no OTR.
That's correct.
Okay, it has to be on their property
Right.
to be an
So if you have
OTR.
front yard parking, that's a violation.
Right.
That could be an order to remedy.
But a lot of these
If
little,
you're dealing with a 73 Broadway, if that's within the village's right of way of village property, that's not an order to remedy. There's no order to remedy, right?
understood.
That one.
Okay, so we have the private property issues and the public property issues, right?
Sorry, Mayor, but that one falls under sort of the category that we were talking about before. It's like, you know, there are properties that are not part of, they're actually parked on the village right away, and they've been there for years. You
Yeah, I
know,
just said
if we
that,
Eliminate,
so-
yeah, but if we eliminate those parking spaces, there's no parking on the street. So how do we tell them a multifamily that now you don't have, you have to find whatever blocks to go there and park there? So I think that's the complex part that we're dealing, and that's, I believe, what you said before is the different buckets. And I think, like Paul said, there's a main bucket that all these other small buckets have to live. And some of them they have to come in front of the board because there are parking on village right away.
So my comment before is the stuff on private property should be dealt with in a specific way. The public property part is a different issue, right? Those are two different pieces. And I think we just have to sort of figure out which things we want to deal with across the board, because it has to be equitable to everybody. The selling of a house, even when you look at those pictures, again, I go back to what Joe said. I can't tell on 73 Broadway whether they have room to put in a driveway, or whether the driveway sits empty, but because it's a hill, it's just easier to park down there. Because
There's
that
a
also
driveway.
is one of the issues, that people build these things because their driveways are steep and it's easier, not because they don't have room, or they don't want to park a car behind another so that every morning they have to move cars around. But that's not the same as saying they don't have the room to do it. So I can't tell by that picture on 73 Broadway whether they have room to park cars. So if the rule says that if you have room for parking and you have a garage, that's where one of the cars should go at the very least, then that's where you park, not on public space. That's what belongs to that house. And when you sell that house, that's how you're going to sell it. So you didn't lose any parking spaces because you built something that's different than the reason of the other street where literally they're on a side of a road where it's really just, there's not a lot of room to park all those cars. There's a few issues involved here. And it is complicated, so we have to look at different pieces and maybe deal with one aspect at a time rather than try to do everything at once. Like, I don't understand why we can't just go tomorrow morning and ticket every car that's parked on private property on grass.
I think if I can chime in here, because this is something that was also in the work plan for 2024 and something that we hope to bring back to the board shortly. And Joe, please correct me if I'm wrong, but for example, if someone parks on their front lawn and someone from code enforcement goes and gives them an OTR, they leave for work the next morning. Now the OTR is cleared because they've moved their car. So then
Right.
that night they come back, they park in the same place, we write a ticket, they leave the next morning, it's cleared again. So something that we had been discussing with Stuart in that specific instance would be seeing what we could ask the board to help us with in the code that would enable perhaps the police department to write a parking ticket for parking on the front lawn, because that's something that's going to stick and not is going to be wiped out when the person leaves for work in the morning.
Got it. That's right. I remember that now.
Correct, right now, the police say they can't write a ticket because it's on private property, and it's obviously not something in our law that allows them to do.
So I think that there are a lot of layers, and some of them have been addressed. I think we will be able to have productive conversations on what the police can do. A lot of this, as Manny just said, has to be done overnight because the cars aren't always there in the morning.
Right.
So to that point, I do think a little bit more work on our end is required to come back with some recommendations on how we can best manage this. Once we start enforcing has to be somewhat comprehensive. So the idea of having one bucket and some smaller buckets out of that bucket, I think is the way we have to go. And, but I don't know if we can work through all the details tonight because it does involve other departments and a lot more
Yeah.
detail.
No, but I think it's not a beginning conversation because we've had this conversation a number of times. It's moving it forward. With the addition of looking at laws that are available at the selling process. We might vote it down for those. Maybe there's a majority vote not to do that, but it's an idea that I think is worth pursuing. I will tell you that there are communities like Upper Saddle River and Saddle River, New Jersey, that have instituted this whole when you sell process, not just about driveways, but actually for them, it was mostly about decks and things like that. Houses that built things have to put it back into the shape, into what was approved. If it wasn't, they have to fix it. I know that for sure about Saddle River and Upper Saddle River, and I know it's New Jersey and not New York, but that's just because that's what I know. I mean, I'm sure there are other instances. Because that actually, I think, is how you actually can enforce something, because it's very hard to go back in time. But the other thing we really didn't even answer, which is the easiest piece, is what do we do going forward? How do we create laws effective X, Y, and Z date that disallows all of this from happening? Like, we need to pass a law that says you're not allowed to park on private property on grass. You're not allowed to blah, 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 you're not allowed to cut curbs. You have to get permit. I mean, like, where are those laws? If we don't have them now, we should be discussing from today forward how to make sure we have no more of this.
Mayor, virtually everything you mentioned is already in the books.
Okay, so we just have to enforce. Everything I mentioned is in the book, so we're just not enforcing it all.
Most of which you have, including the fact that on streets like Ramapo, where it says no parking, the fact of the matter is the prior chief was of the view that they could not issue tickets because it was effectively out, not on the public roadway. I personally disagree with that because it is Ramapo Road. It's the public road. They may have cut it out to put their own parking in there, but the fact of the matter is you're not allowed to park there. They should be ticketed.
Okay, so that isn't a currently, okay, so that's an enforcement of who enforces. All right, so you're telling me all these issues are on the books as law. And
But-
Maddie pointed out, yes, but the OTR for parking on grass is effectively useless because every time they move the car, they've effectively met their OTR. I get that. So we have to figure out what to do with that at the very least. That should be an easy one to figure out at some point. Okay. So I feel like we've moved the ball down the field a little bit with a couple of new ideas. I hope I'm not alone in that feeling, with a couple of new ideas added in. When you guys sort of separate the issues out, I think even if we deal with one bucket at a time, we'll be doing more than has been done here for 30 years. I also realized that a lot of the conversation was about the sweepers, the trucks and all that. But one would imagine that if the sweeper has a hard time following the line and the snow removal and sanitation guys, that the fire trucks would also have a difficult time maneuvering around all of this with cars parked, on streets like that. But maybe I'm wrong about that. It just seems like that would also be an issue, but I haven't heard that as an issue, so maybe it is not an issue. I don't know. Okay. So Paul, did you get anything out of the meeting as next steps? Or Stuart or Maddie or Joe?
I think, from my perspective, I'm gonna take this back and internally I'll send something around with what I think are the recommended buckets to go into the big bucket. I'd like to summarize it. I'll send it around internally to the staff, tell them what I think we should do and start the conversation that way. And a lot of it builds on some of your ideas. And that's where I think is a good place for me to leave off.
Okay. Thank you for showing us the pictures. I think now that we have it in a meeting, I can refer some people to it. And frankly, if community members want to send pictures of their neighbors' houses and all that, they should be able to send it to Paul or Mike to add to the inventory. If they want to, nobody's telling them to do it, but for those that have issues. Okay. Anybody else before we go on to the next item?
We're actually done for tonight.
We have
So,
exec session,
We
folks.
have no more items.
Okay. So we have executive session. I don't think village manager is needed. Maddie, Stuart, it's optional for you. And I don't, as we said, I don't think we've set up a Zoom, so we'll have to do it as a call in. All right, folks. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. I think that we need someone to propose that we conclude the meeting. Are we all done?
Motion to adjourn executive session, please.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, folks, thank you. We will see you next Wednesday for a legislative session. Thank you for joining us today, March 27th. We're ending at 10:16 p.m.